While most might have thought she had run off to go cry in her room, May hadn't gone far at all. The wind whipped across her face as she wedged herself out the narrow window and slowly began ebbing her way toward the landing bridge. May's initial plan was merely to get a better view, but after she crept closer and closer, she felt compelled to do more. Perhaps she could scare the dragon away or warn it somehow, but that meant she had to get closer. May could communicate telepathically at a distance, but only with animals or people she was familiar with. She crept inch by painful inch until there was no place to hide. With each held breath, she darted from hiding place to stone column by stone column. May's heart pounded as she pressed her cheek against the rough granite and peered over at Irene, who was now meditating only a stone toss away. At her feet was a peculiar, ornate, stained wooden box. After several minutes, Irene reached down and picked up the box and strode 8 paces away from her wooden chair and set it down. May's eyes went big when she saw Irene lift the lid. Inside, she could see the top of a shimmering violet crystal sphere. While the charms certainly looked magical, its sole purpose was to sparkle. Such a charm could be seen for miles on a sunny day and would catch the eye of any dragon that was flying overhead. When Irene turned to go back to her chair, her face went pale and her green eyes went big with surprise. May wilted behind the stone pillar. "What are you doing here?" Irene demanded. "Being brave," May squeaked. Irene's head swelled toward the gate and then back toward the stone pillar where the recruit was hiding. If she told the stupid recruit to go back, a dragon might swoop down and snatch her up right as she was running away. Swift movements instigated the dragon's prey drive. "Please don't be mad. I'll go back," May suggested. Somehow she hoped she could mitigate the trespass to a mere beating and not be thrown out of Dragon Hall entirely. "No! Get over here right now and sit on the ground. You're in big trouble," Irene snapped. May slunk out from behind the pillar. "Sit down! Keep your eyes on the sky and say nothing," Irene commanded sternly. May beamed up at Irene. "Thank you," she squeaked. "Don't look at me," Irene snapped at her. May drooped her head and glumly stared at the sparkling dragon charm. "I said, keep your eyes on the sky," Irene snapped impatiently as she examined her instrument. "If you're here, you might as well watch to see if it comes behind me. Whatever happens, keep quiet and don't run," she instructed. May bit her lip as she quickly tore her eyes from the bright, shiny orb and refused to look at the bright horizon or fixate on the beautiful waves on either side of her. But just as she turned her gaze upward and spotted both Ben and Brumir inside the overwatch above the gate, staring down at them with tense concern and worry on their faces. Still angry with Ben, May pretended not to notice him. Instead, she smiled back upward toward Brumir and gave him a not-so-discreet, tantalizing little finger wave. But Brumir didn't so much as blink or turn his head to notice her. May followed his gaze, and what she saw filled her with horror and rage. May stared helplessly at Irene's rich, luscious, black braided hair that reached all the way down to the small of her back, and the nice, clean, black and blue tunic that it rested on. May felt her face and ears burn for the first time. Being bald really hit home. Before, she had practically reveled in the newfound freedom, but now, son of Maltine, she wanted to chop Irene's silly braid off and strangle the dragon soother with her own harp strings. This thought surprised her, as only moments ago May had been idolizing and adoring Irene. "Are you frightened, child?" Irene inquired. May quickly wiped the tear from her face. "No, of course not. I'm," she insisted, as she frantically glanced about, trying to come up with some kind of permissible excuse to be upset about. "You are frightened for the dragon. I understand," Irene confided. "Yes," May agreed, weakly, grateful for the easy way out, when a swirling gust of wind sent the faintest scent of lavender soap tumbling up into her nostrils. Knowing full well that she had been only using stringent lie, only served to remind her that it wasn't hers. She knew she was being silly, but at that moment the thought of comparing her bald fuzzy head and stained gray garments next to Irene was intolerable. But all those silly thoughts vanished the moment she heard the pulsing thresh of great wings and saw the black silhouette rush over the stone bridge as the large bull drake flew past them. While the dragon was still high above them, May was astonished at how big it was. All eyes turned back toward Irene as she ran her fingers through the harp. The great bull drake wheeled round. It was coming back. May turned her head and gasped as the dragon blotted out the sun with its massive wings. May felt like a speck. She felt a wave of dread as it swooped down toward them. She didn't know dragons could grow so big. Such a bull drake might kill off half the colony if it was let inside. The landing bridge trembled as it neatly touched down. The great dragon's glowing silver eyes were fixated on the sparkling charm placed in front of it. His talons rasped and clacked against the stone as it gingerly moved forward to acquire the orb. Once the dragon took possession of the charm, its demeanor quickly changed, and the dragon's attention turned and flashed its massive maw of teeth toward the two humans sitting in front of it. At first, taunting them, a loud, throaty, rumbling growl reverted off the cliff walls. Without any challengers, and quite certain that the object now belonged to him, the bull drake excitedly cracked his tail and let a cackling chortle. May watched in terror as the dragon cocked its head to the side, glancing away from the orb and then down toward Irene. His large nostrils flared with interest as he took in their scent. The dragon was now so close that it could crush them both in its jaws as it curiously investigated a peculiar musical human and its assistant. May closed her eyes and cleared her thoughts, curious to see if the dragon would sense her mind and attempt to communicate with her. She would not press to break into the dragon's consciousness. No, that would be far too dangerous. She was just making herself known. Right away, May's mind was flooded with a torrent of strange smells, sounds, and images. Dragons did not speak like humans, and she quickly found herself overwhelmed. May struggled to find something in common, something they could both relate to. The shiny orb. She did her best to convey that it was his now, and that it was a present. This did not go over well. If the dragon expressed its feelings into words, it would have been a very definitive mine. May quickly realized the very suggestion that she was giving the bull drake anything was implying that she was claiming ownership of it and didn't see him as a threat, which he found to be very patronizing, and that he should eat her. May couldn't help but giggle. The dragon flashed its teeth, but the moment it tried to snap at her, Irene swatted him over the snout with a polished wooden stick with a knot on the end. May wasn't sure what she was more startled by, Irene's response, or the surprise and horrible burning sensation she felt up in her sinuses. It really hurt. Irene calmly set the ornate blackthorn wooden club back next to her knee and resumed playing the soft, sweet, calming melody. Sensing the dragon's hurt and sudden desire to burn them all to a crisp on the spot, May tried again to get his attention. "What's your name?" she called back to him. The glowing furnace faded, and all the great bulldreg's rage fizzled out in the form of twin tendrils of black smoke and bluster that billowed out of its nostrils. While the ancient dragon didn't speak at all like the others, she clearly got the sense that he thought he was, somehow, very upset that she didn't know, that she should know it already, that everyone knew his name. The dragon's scales were deep black, yet at a certain angle of light they shimmered with a bright cobalt blue, much like a raven. "I will name you Raven," May announced. The dragon responded with a roar of protest. May quickly realized her mistake. "But ravens are so beautiful, and ravens are very smart," she insisted. The dragon responded by smashing the crystal orb into a million pieces. "You won't get another one," May informed him. Raven blinked and glanced about the crystal fragments, clearly flustered and upset. "Perhaps we should think about moving back inside," Irene whispered in a low voice, but May was far too interconnected with the dragon that she had not heard or noticed Irene. The ancient dragon was so prideful and silly that it was now trying to imply it had smashed her charm and there wasn't anything she could do about it. Somehow, suddenly, he had decided the charm was hers again and not his anymore. "What if I smashed your things? How would you feel?" May demanded. Smoke funneled out of the dragon's nostrils. Its large, stormy gray eyes blazed with anger. May crossed her arms and turned away. "I'm very offended," she announced. Raven's long talons scraped against the stone, leaving large scratch marks as he attempted to push the broken shards back together. All eyes watched in absolute dismay as May stubbornly shook her head, refusing to accept the pile of bits and pieces as compensation. Raven let out a deep, frustrated, angry growl. Irene placed her hand on May's shoulder, beckoning her away from the dragon, but just when it seemed as Raven would rip them all to shreds, the dragon dove off the side of the stone landing bridge, and its powerful wings sent it soaring back into the sky, until finally the sound of threshing wings faded away, and there was nothing but a speck on the horizon. May sighed and dutifully stooped downward to begin putting the broken fragments into the wooden box. "What did you do?" Irene demanded. When May glanced up, she was surprised to see Irene's face gaunt and ashen with worry. She began. She wasn't sure what to say because she wasn't entirely sure either. "What did it say?" Irene demanded. May bit her lower lip. She began. It was difficult to translate what non-human creatures were saying into words. There was so much information to pick through, so much that were no use to humans at all. Such things about the wind, the weather, the smells, angles of the sun, air moisture, humidity. All this from the more recognizable, "How dare you call me a bird? Look at my big beautiful wings. Be afraid." I'm smarter than you. You don't even know how to fly. Lots of sparkles. It's mine. Go away. How dare you even call me a raven? I hate your stupid rock. I'm sorry. This is stupid. Before May could begin to unpack all that had happened, Simmons and Torn, along with all the other Dragon Masters, came running out onto the landing bridge. Magi Simmons was the first one out the door. Master Torn managed to plow through everyone else and come up behind him as a close second. "What happened? What did it say?" Simmons asked. "He was very rude," May announced. Her attempts of looking calm, cool, and collected quickly evaporated as giant, mangled hands grabbed her by the shoulder, and she found herself staring up into Torn's scarred, scary face. "Is it coming back?" Torn demanded. May felt like she was going to melt, but Irene quickly stepped in. "I want another try," she declared. Cora cursed angrily. "We agreed on one and only one try. It attacked Nora. It killed Golden Eyes. It will kill again," she shot back angrily. Warren quickly shook his head in disagreement. "But they successfully contacted the Bull Drake. If we bring it in, we could send Prince and Rex to another colony. This could be a wonderful addition and a chance of discovery," he insisted. Torn grimaced. "We're already short-handed. We need to be on patrol. Every day we're not in the sky. The whole northeastern coast is vulnerable," he growled. "It wouldn't be permanent," Warren assured him. "We can quickly adjust once Irene tames the Bull Drake." Irene shook her head. "I wasn't making any progress at all. The dragon's entire focus was on May," she explained. Cora's dark eyes blazed with anger. "Don't be stupid, Irene! Don't you drag this girl into this! It's fine if you get yourself killed, but this is beyond despicable," she scowled. But when no one else looked over toward her or raised their voice in support, she cursed at them angrily. "Her bloody, ashen corpse will be upon your heads, not mine," she shouted, and turned to go back inside. "Its name is Raven, and I'm not a little girl, you stupid cow!" she shouted, and then quickly clapped her hands over her mouth. The air suddenly became dry as the desert. Fire blossomed from Cora's hand, and then she turned. Torn folded his arms over his chest. Irene snatched May, and everyone else piled up behind the hulking black mountain of scars and leather like pages stacked behind the book cover. Satisfied, Cora extinguished the flame and walked away. To May's surprise, when the hulking, scary bear of a man turned back around, he had a big, white, toothy grin on his face. "Fine! If it comes back, one more try," he agreed. It was then the blast of a horn came from the gatehouse lookout tower. "It's coming back!" Broomer shouted. May gasped, and she turned. Yes, the dragon was coming back. It was a mere black smudge on the horizon now, but it was getting closer, flying low and coming in fast. Irene frowned. "Broomer? When did he get back from Mender's Hall?" she demanded. Simmons quickly turned over to Torn and gave him a look of shock and disapproval. "Yes, I thought he was supposed to be resting," he gasped. Torn rolled his eyes. "You two mind your own business and just focus on not getting eaten," he growled. May grinned. She felt like a fountain of butterflies were trapped inside of her. While the others hurried back inside, she held her breath and waited for Raven to make his landing. Irene gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder as she took her seat and pulled her harp back out and began to play. "Well, that was fast. What do you suppose your dragon is up to?" Irene remarked as she plucked the slow, calming melody. The music was as much to calm May and herself as it was to soothe the big bull drag barreling toward them. May squinted her eyes and put her hand over her mouth as she giggled. "He's got a fish! A giant fish!" she marveled. Irene glanced up. It did have a fish. An enormous marlin that was almost the size of Torn wriggled and flopped in its talons. The closer it came, the more the marlin's distinctive profile came into view, with its sword-like nose and sail-like fin and wondrous scaly body that sparkled in the sunlight. The great black bull drake landed neatly onto the bridge. Raven pranced over toward May and flopped down the fish in front of her. May took a step back as the slimy fish began to spastically wriggle about until Raven expertly used a talon to sever its spine and end its life. Clearly satisfied with itself, Raven glanced over toward May and then down at the fish, clearly expecting something from her, but she didn't know what. Irene kicked May in the shin. "Don't be rude," she whispered. "Ouch! May blinked. Oh, what a big and beautiful fish it is," she marveled out loud. Somehow she was getting the impression that Raven was trying to compensate her for the priceless, broken crystal dragon charm. Well, in the dragon's mind, it felt that it was being far too generous to the silly human. "How did you catch it? It's so big," May remarked. Raven tilted its head, clearly baffled by the human's stupidity. May turned to Irene for help. "Why don't you ask if Raven would like to come inside and have a nice ash bath?" she suggested. May bit her lip. Would you like to come inside?" she offered. Raven perked up, but the dragon seemed hesitant. "We'll bring you lots of ash and a goat," May offered. While she spoke, she projected the images to the dragon so he could understand her. Raven craned his neck down, snatched up the large fish into its jaws, unfolded its wings, and wandered through the open gates into what had been outfitted as the kill room, which was now being loaded with the fresh ashes which came raining down from the arrow holes. "Well done," Irene praised her as she put her harp away. "Now for the hard part," she mused out loud. "Hard part?" May exclaimed. Irene smiled. "Not so hard," she assured her. "What do we do now?" May asked. Irene smirked. "I'm going to get something to eat, and you're going to stay with the dragon." "For how long?" May gasped. Irene shrugged. "Until we are sure it won't eat anyone else." May wasn't sure whether to be happy about this or not. She was so excited and so overwhelmed at the same time. She had only thought she was going to be Irene's helper for a little while, and then go back to her normal routine, and then curl up in her cot at the end of the day like she always did. Raven chortled happily as ash began pouring down from the channels above him. May grasped at Irene. "Please don't leave me. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about dragons. It's huge. Dragon riders are supposed to work with hatchlings, not giant, man-eating bull drags. What if it won't listen to me?" she pleaded. Irene quirked an amused eyebrow. "And you will think it will listen to me, do you?" she remarked. May suddenly wanted to take Irene's harp and throw it off the landing bridge. "This isn't fair. I'm not ready," she exclaimed, but Irene continued forward into the courtyard, where she paused, smiling at the dragon and then to May. "True," she agreed. May's jaw went slack, but before she could object, Irene stepped through the heavy side door. "You can't," she began, but the door was locked. May wanted to burst into tears. She wasn't ready. It was then a familiar voice called out from her from above. It was Ben. "Good job, May," Ben called down to her. May's smile vanished when she saw the basket being lowered down. First came bristle brushes, mineral oils, salt crystals, a flat shovel, a rake, and a myriad of other tools. "But what about me?" she called back up the narrow stone hole in the ceiling. "Food and water and clean clothes are coming," Ben assured her through a tired yawn. "Do you need anything else?" Milo asked. May wanted to claw Ben's eyes out. She wanted to rip his still-beating heart and feed it to the dragon. She was furious. "No, I don't. I'm fine," she snapped back at Milo. "No, I meant for the dragon," Milo insisted with a silly grin. May stalked off and sulkily planted her bottom over by a sandbag and stared helplessly at the enormous bull drake. Raven chortled happily, not even noticing her as he snapped at the steady stream of ashes being poured in from above. May had always wanted to be a dragon rider. She had hoped to get a hatchling, something cute and cheerful and happy to see her. Instead, she was now trapped with an ill-mannered monster. And worst of all, she had no one else to blame but herself. She wondered what she would do. She had nothing to compare this to. Perhaps a horse. A giant horse that would eat her and fly off. No, this was not a horse. More like a giant cat with wings. Only instead of bringing her birds, she would get giant fish. Son of Maltine, what was she going to do with the fish? It was huge. It was going to smell, and she couldn't get rid of it without upsetting the dragon. For now, it would rot and smell at the place until she could figure out how to distract him. That part wouldn't be too hard. But somehow she knew this was going to be the first of many giant fishes on her doorstep. While May began plotting how to get rid of the horrible fish, she spotted something very alarming. Broken bits of arrow stuck out from this thick underbelly. She picked up a brush with a long pole handle and quietly approached the dragon, and gently at first began brushing him along his neck. This was greeted with happy thrums that resonated through the stone lobby. Those happy noises were encouraging and brought a smile to her face. Perhaps a little like a horse then, she thought. Horses loved being brushed. Perhaps she could slowly build a relationship with Raven after all. She proceeded until she reached the frayed arrow tips. The dragon didn't so much as blink as they fell away like loose scales. May gulped. She had hoped that possibly she could find a way to bond with Raven like she had with Prince. Raven needed nothing, and would stay as long as he found it entertaining. May couldn't help but selfishly wonder what it would be like if Raven just flew off. Then things would go back to normal, and she could go back into her own warm, cozy little bed, and then she would wake up and go back to being a recruit. May bit her lip. If she tamed Raven, she would be able to grow out her hair. She remembered coveting Irene's rich, full black hair. If she tamed Raven, that could be her. Well, she wouldn't have black hair unless she dyed it, but still, the only other way was to quit and find a position as a mage in some dull, stuffy library. But that wasn't nearly as dreadful as going back home to her family and seeing her mother gloating with supreme satisfaction. What would be worse was that May would have to lie and admit that she just changed her mind and that her mother was right because she wouldn't be able to tell anyone that she had gotten everything she had hoped for. She had gotten a dragon and then ran back home like a spoiled little girl that had insisted that she could ride by herself and then quit the first time her horse tossed her into the mud. May closed her eyes. She couldn't quit. Not now. She would either fail and go back to being a fuzzy-headed recruit or tame Raven and become a real dragon rider like Irene. Yes, she would be like Irene, and she wouldn't ever let herself be a bitter, jealous, rotten snood like Cora. May bit her lip. She stared up at Raven. Tame. Perhaps not tame, but she had to at least convince him to stay. Even if the mess of gates closed on him, he would eventually claw and burn his way out. There wasn't anything keeping him if he didn't want to be kept. May's eyes darted over toward the giant fish. Oh, gross. How was she going to get rid of the fish and keep the dragon? Hey! May exclaimed, but there was nothing she could do as the raven snatched the brush away, and with each munch she turned it into a pile of wooden splinters, and after a few thoughtful moments, spat it out. May hurried toward the door and began banging on it. No one answered. May stormed toward one of the small stone windows in the wall. Magi Cora smiled back at her. May felt her stomach churn into a bunch of knots. Cora was the last person she wanted to talk to. May glanced around, but there was no one else. "Where's Irene?" May demanded. "Master, Irene is in the banquet hall, celebrating with the others," Cora replied calmly. May frowned. "What are you doing here, then?" "Watching. Do you need anything?" Cora asked icily as she turned her attention back to her book. May swallowed hard. "Can I talk to Master Irene? Raven just ate my brush," she protested. Cora glanced up from the book she was reading and took another sip of her tea. He must be hungry. You should feed him," she remarked. With what?" May demanded. Cora licked her finger and gingerly turned a page. "Seems like your dragon likes fish. He brought you a fish. It would be nice to have a dragon that can catch fish. That's one thing about tame dragons. They do get so very lazy," she sighed. May wanted to scream. "Where is Irene? I need to talk to her," she demanded. "Irene won't be available until tomorrow. I'm on first watch. Do you have any other questions?" Cora inquired. She turned another page. May's thin nostrils flared, and she quickly brushed away some tears. She was so angry and upset, yet the only one she could talk to was the person she had just called a cow. "I'm sorry I called you bad names. I need help. I don't know what to do," she sniffed. But Cora was not fazed in the slightest, and never once looked up from her book or away from her tea. "Would you like a goat to be sent in? Goats are expensive, but this is your dragon. If it's easier, it can be arranged. Is that what you want? Why don't you try the fish?" she asked dispassionately, like she was talking about butter on toast. May turned away. To her front was the dragon, and behind her was Cora. "The fish is just lying there, stinking up the place, and Raven won't eat it," she sniffed. "Have you tried cooking it?" Cora asked. May crossed her arms over herself. She hated Cora. She was always hate Cora. "My dragon likes cooked food," Cora shrugged. May bit her tongue. It was a giant fish. It would be impossible to cook it all. Cora was just being cruel. Cora sipped at her tea. "It's the smell of the food that dragons like. Even if you cook a little bit and toss it onto the fish, he will eat the whole thing. Would you like me to help you?" she asked. Tears flooded down May's face, and she quickly bobbed her head up and down. "Oh, please, please, Magic Cora," she begged. "Only this once, child, and then you'll have to use a frying pan like everyone else," Cora assured her. May gasped as suddenly the giant marlin burst into flames. Excited by the fire, Raven happily dragged the fish over to his new, giant ashen mound and began chomping it down. "Do you need anything else?" Cora asked. May quickly shook her head, but Cora stuffed a pillow and a blanket through the hole anyway. "Thank you," May squeaked. Cora responded by sealing off the hole in the wall with a wooden stopper, ending any and all conversation for the night. May wanted to hate Cora. She really did, but the more she tried, the more silly she felt. She sighed and ran her hand over her bald head, her poor bald head, and then glanced over toward the dragon, whom, after eating, was now growing lethargic. Dragons really only needed to eat a large meal once a month. Everything else was just for fun, and purely out of predator instinct. Horses were so much easier. Dragons were not at all like horses. No, they were more like large cats. May wondered what Raven thought of humans. May felt like a mouse trying to make friends with an owl. Now that she had gotten the owl in the barn, she had no idea what to do next. Somehow, she had a feeling nobody else did either, and everyone was just surprised that they had gotten this far. The ocean wind that came through the gates into the lobby was bitter cold. Even with the blanket and pillow Cora had given her, May's teeth chattered through the night. When she was a child, she had dreamed of falling asleep, curled up in the warm, velvety folds of the dragon's wings, but she wasn't ready for that yet. Raven was still very new. She didn't want to scare him. No, that didn't seem right. Raven wasn't scared of her at all. As far as she could tell, her big bulldrake had just made its nest and set claim to all the founders. May couldn't help but wonder where the large dragon had come from. Typically, the young fledglings were pushed out into the lower valleys and occasionally became local pests to farmers and townsfolk. It was so odd for a bulldrake like Raven to be out here near founders. Not unheard of, but still, it was very strange. May wondered how old the dragon was. It would be absolutely horrible if he just curled up and died on her. A big, cranky, luminous silver eye fluttered open and lazily peered over the berm of compacted gray ashes. May bit her lower lip as a dragon lethargically circled several times over, readjusting itself. She didn't need to be in its mind to realize what was going on. "You didn't need to eat it all at once," she chided him, and she was rebuffed with the image of her trapped inside an egg. May frowned. "I'm still mad at you," she declared. Both eyes flickered open, and Raven's head emerged from above its wings. Another image was sent of a fish. May responded with the image of a broken, long-handled grooming brush. A low, flustered growl resonated through the stone lobby. "I don't want another fish," May shot back grouchily, and stubbornly shook her head at the offerings. A piece of driftwood, a ship wheel, a large fishing buoy, a large rock, a bigger stick. "I want to go flying," May announced. Raven's eyes narrowed, and he turned his head away, clearly annoyed at the request. May sighed. It was worth a try. She had hoped that flying might come later when he was tame, but somehow she doubted that would happen any time soon. Chapter 14. Helviste. Nora Frey smiled contentedly as she watched her lover leave the cabin. She would miss him, but it was best this way. Vila needed his time out in the wilderness, and she needed to focus as well. Dragons were temperamental creatures, and she would need time alone to build the relationship between the beast. If Vila was nearby, she would be overwhelmed with his nervous energy, while at the same time trying to focus on the dragon. The last thing she wanted was for Vila or the dragon to panic before she established a bond. Yes, it was better this way, she thought to herself as she put her hair back into a tight braid and sought out her warm white fur overcoat and hat. Once she was ready, she opened the door and forced herself to smile as she tipped the baggage handlers to carry her chest over toward the coach waiting for her. Son of Maltine, she was running behind. As she stepped off the ferry, she immediately regretted not having Vila's big hulking shadow looming over her. Now she had to deal with the slack-jawed stares. When Vila was with her, those slack jaws and big eyes would have quickly found something more interesting to fixate their eyes on, perhaps an oddly shaped cloud, or the sun. No matter. She quickly got into her carriage and shut the blinds for privacy. Before long, they came to the mountain fortress that overlooked the city. Part of her wanted to give the guards a tongue lashing for letting them pass without doing a proper inspection. But then again, she decided against it. Helvisti was hardly like the borderlands down south. The only thing the guards and Helvisti had to worry about was getting frostbite and making sure nobody stole their coal stockpile or their ice. Surprisingly, she had learned that Helvisti's economy revolved mainly around trading and transporting huge blocks of ice down south to be sold for cold storage or served as frosty desserts and beverages in wealthy, high-end establishments. Ice was big business. It was cheap and plentiful here, but every fishmonger and butcher needed it. So much ice. Cart after cart was being hauled to the docks to transport the heavy, fresh-cut blocks. Supposedly, bandits over here fought over ice and control over the plentiful frozen lakes. Helvisti. If hell could freeze over, Nora was pretty sure Helvisti was it. Once her carriage stopped, she got out and glanced around the mountain fortress nestled beneath the great Helvisti lighthouse. Nora took in a deep breath and lightly prodded the curtain with her index finger to get a glimpse of what was waiting for her outside. As predicted and as dreaded, she saw column after column of men-at-arms standing at attention, waiting with their polished armor, shields, and spears glistening in the sun. Nora took in a cleansing breath. She wasn't sure what would be better, to either disappear altogether or vaporize the whole lot of them. Laughter. Nora bristled as she felt the warmth of laughter touch her consciousness. But it wasn't long before she closed her eyes and allowed herself to fall into the warm, mental, comforting embrace that she shared with their soul bond. Within it, she became aware of her guardian's zest, power, and love for life as he led his men, breaking the trail like an alpha wolf through the deep snow. Well, she couldn't see it exactly, but she felt it. Nora sent him back the warm embrace, planting a kiss on the nape of his neck and smelling his long black hair. She thanked him and urged him to return back to her safely, or she'd kill him. She left him with a bite on the ear, and he sent her lurching out of the carriage with a pinch on the bottom. The coachman wilted beneath her wild-eyed glower. "Welcome to Helvisti, Magi Frey," he squeaked. Nora extinguished the flame in her palm and regained her military bearing. She was going to make Vila pay. Once she made her way to the gate, she quickly spotted what she assumed to be fellow dragon riders that had come to greet her. She felt a lump in her throat. No doubt they already knew what tragedy had befallen her. Some, she could tell, already regarded her with disdain. When she approached them, they snapped to attention and saluted her. All except one. By the red arm badge, with the rose and navigational star in the center, she was the head healer. It suddenly dawned on her that these 6 officers before her were in charge of her 8 battalions. But there should have been 8. While it stung not to be greeted by her fellow dragon riders, she would not tolerate her subordinates turning their backs on her. "I'm Major Grenwald's, in charge of logistics and heavy infantry. All are present and accounted for," Major Grenwald's thundered proudly. Nora blinked. She stared at the large, barrel-chested, heavy-set man. Heavy infantry indeed, she thought to herself. "Where are the rest of my officers?" she demanded. All were silent, all except her head healer in her bright red golden trim silk cloak, who let out a flippant, scathing sniff of disdain as she gave her a sidelong glance. Nora couldn't help notice how big her eyes were compared to the rest of her thin-faced, sharp flint-like nose. Her short, cropped hair didn't help soften it either. "I'm Treja, the head mender for the regiment. Major Rodriguez, who's in charge of the Arctic Light Infantry, is out with your sword caddy on their pilgrimage. Other than that, all are present," she declared. Nora felt her throat go tight. While she wished she could have her flogged, she couldn't. Menders were a class all to themselves, and Treja clearly had a grudge against her. Part of her wanted to take her aside and apologize, but she couldn't look weak. Not now. "Yes, but where is the rest of my regiment?" she demanded. Her eyes flashed toward Major Grenwald's, and then toward the short, skinny officer with the impish smirk on his face and the clipboard in his hand. "I'm Major Parvu, and I am in charge of supply and logistics. All present and accounted for, Magi," he declared, and saluted smartly after handing over the clipboard to the new battle mage. Nora glanced down. She felt her skin burn so hot she thought her face might peel off. This is it," she gasped. "Oh, we'll be getting new recruits soon," Major Grinwald assured her. Nora sighed as she passed the clipboard back. She had been told she would be in charge of a regiment. It wasn't even half. The other thing that bothered her was that her depleted regiment only had 5 officers. This was an unlucky number. 8, like the 8-pointed navigational star, was preferred, but the last thing she needed was to divide her soldiers into an even smaller groups to satisfy her silly superstitions. Such a rash decision would create havoc amongst the existing command structure. Son of Maltine. If she did that, they would be calling 2 guards on patrol, a whole bloody squad, not to mention the payment issues that would arise. "I have 500 men to patrol all of Helvisti province," she remarked. The thought chilled her and made her feel numb inside. We aren't called the Frozen Chosen for nothing, Magi, chortled Major Parvu. Nora closed her eyes and took in a deep, cleansing breath. Very well. I'll make do with what I have. Where is the Dragon Hall? She asked. Right this way, Parvu declared, and with one sweeping motion he gestured to the large, heavy doors in front of her. Nora brightened up and glanced down at the report. Thank you, Major Parvu. You have been very accommodating. Parvu beamed happily. You're most welcome, Magi, he saluted. Do you happen to have a list of the other Dragon Masters that I will be working with? She asked. A surprised look came over Parvu's face. No, Magi, I do not, he confessed. Nora wasn't sure if this was something that had never been requested before, or if he was disappointed in himself for not being adequately prepared. Regardless, she gave him her best, appreciative, understanding smile. After all, Parvu seemed to be very eager to help. She didn't want to discourage that. Not a problem. Have one of your aides bring it to me in the morning, she instructed. Parvu let out a tentative, nervous laugh. Forgive my laughter. That would be a horrible waste of parchment. You are the only Dragon Master currently in Helvisti, Magi, he explained. Time seemed to slow. The only one. The only Dragon Master in all of Helvisti. Nora wasn't sure how she felt about that. Being the only one. The only one. The only one in all of Helvisti. Perhaps Parvu was joking. She stared at him. She glanced around at the others. Either they had the best poker faces in the world, or they were telling the truth. Nora had fallen for pranks before, but this was a line too far. She turned. Not even the common infantry cracked a smile. All stared straight ahead, like tin soldiers staring into space. You mean the only Dragon Master in Helvisti City? Nora ventured. Parvu shook his head. No, the entire Helvisti province, he assured her. Nora strangely felt a heavy weight lift away from her shoulders. If this was true, the horrid shame and dread of having to share her story to the rest of the dragon riders about how she had lost her first dragon all but vanished. And then the heavy weight of responsibility hit her, right in the stomach like an iron fist. She felt sick. Her legs felt wobbly. What happened to the others? Nora ventured. Parvu hesitated, but Treja, the head healer, was all too eager to share. They died, she announced with a cheerful grin. Nora kept cool and calm as she posed her next question. How did they die exactly? Tanner went missing last winter. Aelron died in an avalanche the winter before that, and Malrin was mauled by his dragon last month. I can go on if you wish. Treja chimed with a pleasant, sickly sweet and hopeful smile. Nora frowned. What is an avalanche? She asked. Oh, yes, it's like a rock slide, but with snow and ice. We have lost many good men to avalanches, Grinwald explained somberly. It's a terribly slow way to die. You should try it, Treja suggested with a venomous grin. Menders could do that. So long as they didn't endanger anyone, they could do almost whatever they wanted. The last thing Nora wanted was to go to General Gordon and complain her first day of taking command, and how her healer hated her and made her feel bad and had called her mean names. While Trasia's behavior was absolutely disgraceful, she couldn't do or say anything about it without looking 10 times the fool. And yet, for the first time in weeks, Nora felt something awaken within her. It was beyond anger or hatred. Instead of getting angry, Nora felt herself stand a little taller, and she smiled at her new nemesis. "Perhaps I will. I just hope I may live long enough to redeem myself first." This only served to infuriate the headmender all the more. "Some things can't be repaid," Traja snapped, and then turned on her heel and marched off before being excused. Nora couldn't help but smile with grim determination. Traja, that horrid, bug-eyed witch, whether she knew it or not, was exactly what she needed. This was something Vila couldn't ever do. Vila was always on her side. But what Nora really needed right now was an enemy, someone she could figuratively grind into powder. Her poor sword companion had been bearing the brunt of her anger for some time. Finally, she had someone she could actually hate without feeling sorry about it after. "Shall I show you to your living quarters, Magi?" Parvu asked hesitantly. "Yes, thank you," Nora agreed. But the moment they passed through the gate, her hopes of finding some peace and quiet all but vanished, as Parvu nervously gestured toward the yurt in the middle of the courtyard. Nora was not above a cozy little yurt if she was on campaign or out in the field. But this, right now, when she was in the middle of the tremendous, bustling Helvistic capital city, a bloody blessed Helvistes in the gods-forsaken Helvisti province, this hut was not suitable for her rank or position. Her infantrymen had better accommodations than this. Her eyes darted toward the castle mansion's doors. The doors were locked and boarded up from the outside. "Did the menders put you up to this?" she demanded. Parvu defensively put up his hands as he attempted to calm her down. "It's not what you think," he assured her. "What is it then?" Nora demanded. "Well, your dragon is inside, and, well, it's not happy." Nora frowned. "In my house?" She pointed to the marvelous mountainside mansion. Parvu nodded. Nora took in a deep breath. The idea of a dragon living inside her house was... "I expect my horses inside my home as well?" she asked, with a sickly, sweet sarcasm in her voice. Parvu quickly shook his head. There was a horse, but..." His voice trailed off, and he gave an apologetic shrug. He didn't need to finish the sentence. She already knew what that meant. Her new dragon was a public menace, and instead of putting it down, they had sealed it up in her house, and now it was her problem. "Who let it inside?" she asked. Parvu grimaced. "Nobody let the dragon inside, but General Gordon gave the order to keep it inside so it wouldn't get back out." Again, Parvu laughed nervously. "But that reminds me, General Gordon was going to explain your situation in more detail over dinner," he assured her. "When is that?" Nora asked. Parvu grimaced. "He has been expecting you. You may accompany me in my carriage if you wish," he offered. That was the nice way of saying that she was late, and to please hurry. Chapter 15. Unfashionably Late. Judging by the empty chairs at the banquet table and the idle chatter amongst the few remaining guests, it was quite evident that being fashionably late had passed several hours ago. The dozing bookkeeper gasped in surprise when he awoke to find the excruciatingly beautiful woman in the white mink fur coat looming over him. "Ladies and gentlemen, now introducing the guest of honor, Magi Norfrey," he declared. General Gordon rose to his feet. His officers and their aides quickly followed his lead. "Magi, you have finally come at last," General Gordon's voice boomed through the vaulted high ceiling as he quietly beckoned her to come and sit at the large table. One servant offered to take her coat, and another held his hand to help guide her down the flight of stairs, but her cold glare sent them both on their way. First impressions were important. Nora wasn't about to be seen being helped down the flight of stairs like some fragile, high-born flower or some old lady. And she certainly wasn't going to give up her coat. She did not plan on staying long, and secondly, nobody else was in uniform. General Gordon himself was reclining in his chair in a full-length, gold-trimmed, purple toga and sandals. However, despite the relaxed posture, his pronounced, offset, hawk-like nose, aggressive, sunken, calculating, beady black eyes, hard jaw, clean and level, short, silver hair gave off an entirely different signal altogether. Nora reluctantly took a seat, ignoring the grinning faces of her peers. "How have you been settling in?" Gordon asked. The smart little comment and the stifled snickers from some of the not-so-sober fellow war mages quickly reminded her of the little yurt in the courtyard and why she had come in the first place. Nora's sharp blue eyes darted up from the rim of her glass, and with great deliberate poise and self-control, set the cup down without showering everyone with a fine crimson vapor of red wine, and responded in a calm, tranquil voice, "Very well, thank you." General Gordon smiled a devious smile. "Excellent. Try the caviar. It has been chilled on the freshest ice in all of Marne." Nora waved the caviar away. "I have already eaten, and there is a lot to go over," she insisted. While many might have been impressed with any kind of dish on ice, Nora was a farm girl, and she knew what fresh tasted like. Anything on ice could be weeks or even months old. "What's on your mind, Magi?" Gordon asked. Nora took in a deep breath through her thin nostrils before asking in a calm, focused voice, "First, I was told more recruits would be coming shortly. Second, when? And lastly, how long do I have until I'm expected to patrol all of Helvesti province with only half a regiment?" General Gordon perked up. "Not to worry," he assured her. "It's Mora's time now. We'll be getting recruits coming in sometime around Frey time," he explained. Mora was the goddess of fall, harvester of the dead souls, and known to make personal visitations to brave soldiers of valor before, during, or after they die. Frey was the goddess of winter, and conveniently married to Maltine, the tester of men. "Recruits in winter," Nora remarked, doing so as carefully as she could, so that she would not be perceived to be challenging the decision, while at the same time politely pressing for more information on why it was so. "Yes," he chuckled. "We have winter survival training camps up in the Baru Waste to toughen the recruits up. Not to worry. Every regiment cycles through and takes their turn going on patrol. Your regiment won't be due to leave on patrol until Sprigga time. I made sure you would have a chance to get to know Helvisti before sending your regiment on patrol," he assured her. This caused Nora to let out a small, pent-up breath as she relaxed. While she was still quite annoyed with her housing situation, she was relieved she would not be thrown into the Baru Waste before she was ready. Thankfully, she could rely on Vila for advice, as this god's-forsaken, frozen wasteland was practically his backyard. She could sense him now, grinning as he waded through chest-deep snow like a newborn wolf pup. All she had to worry about now was the dragon squatting inside her house. She wasn't about to let Vila know or come back from his adventures to find her locked outside in some little tent. No, she was determined to be lounging in the lap of luxury, sipping on warm spice wine in front of a raging fireplace when he came limping back to her, all frostbitten and famished. "Do you have any more questions, Magi?" General Gordon inquired. Nora gave a polite, thin-lipped smile. "There is one delicate matter I hope to ask about concerning the dragon that I've been assigned to," she announced. "But I can wait for a better time to speak in private," she added. General Gordon smiled and knowingly gave a slight tap on his crooked nose and rose to his feet, but quickly encouraged the officers to remain seated before beckoning Nora to follow. "Come, let us walk and talk," he beckoned as he took the lead, and began to walk together along the warm hallways with rich, dark wood siding and tapestries of old battles, legends, and scenes of hunters taking deer and pheasants. "Please, what is on your mind, Magi?" Gordon asked. "I request permission to speak freely, General," Nora ventured. General Gordon smiled. "Denied," he responded in a cool, dry voice. "But do your best to formally make your inquiry known," he encouraged. Nora bristled and took in another cleansing breath to keep herself calm and poised. "Yes, General, I shall," she agreed, before carefully and painstakingly posed her next question, without raising her voice or breaching polite dialogue and protocol that was expected from a subordinate. "I was wanting to know if you knew why there's a dragon living in my house," she asked. An amused smile flared across Gordon's lips. "Yes, because I gave the command to seal it up inside." Nora did her best to remain calm. "Dragons are not exactly good house pets," she remarked. "I don't imagine they would be," Gordon agreed, smiling as he let Nora suffer in silence before gracing her with the information that she was dying to ask for. But it had become quite the nuisance in the city and countryside. Lots of stolen sheep, horses, and damaged rooftops. When it moved in, I felt it was best and safest for everyone to keep it where it was, he said at last, and smiled as he glanced over enjoying the look of deep concern over her face. "Naturally, now that you are here, I'm sure you'll be able to handle the dragon situation, and when everything's in order, I'm sure the staff will return and gladly help you move in," he added. "Do you have any other questions for me, Magi?" Nora was still for a long moment. "Thank you. May I be excused, General?" she asked. "Not until you answer my questions," he insisted. "Of course, General," Nora agreed robotically. "Do you know why you are here?" Gordon asked. Nora felt a lump form inside her throat. Despite her shame, she stood tall and looked Gordon back in the eyes as she answered, "My sword companion used his boon to grant me a pardon and spare my life. Now I am here," she confessed. Gordon chuckled softly. "Almost true," he remarked. Nora frowned, but he went on to explain. "It is true. Vila did request that you be pardoned, but I made it so for my own reasons," he declared. "What reasons?" Nora demanded, clearly suspicious of his intentions. It would not be the first time some highborn tried to pull some strings to coax her into bed. Most would have put this troublesome beast down long ago, and I was ready to do so. But Vila highly recommended that I give you a chance to see what you could do with it. Nora groaned inwardly. "It is a difficult task to tame adult dragons once they have turned to kill livestock for pleasure," she lamented. "I'm afraid I may be a disappointment," she sighed. General Gordon merely shrugged. "The livestock is the least of my concerns. The dragon is more than a beast. It is the spirit of Helvesti, and as far as I am concerned, perhaps the only one of its kind to be hatched in human hands in all of Marin. I cannot let it go free and terrorize the people, and Governor von Claris has made it abundantly clear that a great deal of the tribespeople revere it as a divine spirit, and has advised me to avoid killing it at all costs. Naturally, you have already lost one dragon. If it dies in your care, or goes on a killing spree, I will make certain that this is placed on your head, not mine. Do you understand?" Shocked and overwhelmed, Nora forced herself to nod. "I will do my best, but—" Gordon's stern gaze told her he wasn't interested in her best, just so long as it resulted in a happy, healthy dragon that didn't go around eating innocent civilians. "I will see that the dragon you have entrusted me to is well taken care of. I will not fail," she assured him. General Gordon gave a nod of approval. "You are dismissed." Nora gave a quick bow and gratefully took her leave. However, when she returned to the dining hall, she found Parvu had left without her. Cursing inwardly, and too proud to ask for a ride, Nora helped herself out the gate and began the long walk back home. Fortunately, it wasn't too far off. Well, not by carriage, it wasn't, but the long walk and fresh air was needed to clear her head. Part of her ached for Vila to be with her, yet part of her was glad she had the space to think. If Vila had been with her, he would have probably bonked several officers over the head and thrown General Gordon through a window. Nora smiled at the thought. It was a pleasant thought. But she needed to focus on her dragon problem. It was dusk when she finally got back. To her surprise, smoke was coming out of the little chimney. Inside the yurt was warm and cozy. Nora's concerns quickly melted away when she discovered the short note left on her bed. Warm greetings. I will return in the morning with breakfast and more coal for the stove. May Helvisti bless you both. From Nadette, warm wishes. Nora smiled as she set the note on the nightstand next to the warm lantern and hung up her heavy fur coat. Nadette. She seemed like a very nice lady. She felt confident that Nadette was going to be her new best friend, and let out a heavy sigh before changing into her blue, full-length silk robe. She really needed a friend. Before, she had always been able to talk to Golden Eyes. She had raised the dragon from a hatchling, and he was very well behaved, not at all like this problem dragon doing gods know what inside her house. A warm caress went across her cheek. Nora smiled as she rested her head on the soft feather pillow. It was Vila. She closed her eyes. He was thinking of her. She smiled as she felt him drift away to sleep. Chapter 16. Visitors. In the morning, Nora awoke to the soft crackling sound of a small fire outside, followed by the rich aroma of freshly cooked oats. The wholesome smell brought a smile to her face as it woke the memory of her childhood back in Barlington, of fresh oats in the morning. Ever since she had become a dragon rider, she had gotten accustomed to posh, big breakfasts, eggs, bacon, sausage, and toast, with bright-colored jams and sweet preserves. It had been years since she had a simple, nice, warm bowl of oatmeal. With a smile, she pushed away the fur blankets and slipped her toes into the cozy, fur-lined moccasins. Vila had purchased them for her. Her mind went out to him. She felt the warm kiss to the forehead. She wanted to reach at him, smell his hair, but she forced herself to withdraw. The last thing she wanted was to distract him while he was climbing. On the other side of the embroidered canvas tent flap sat an old woman stirring a steaming pot of oatmeal with a wooden spoon. Her clothes were made of reindeer hide, and her hair was kept in a long gray frizzled ponytail. She had 3 vertical black lines on her chin, which Nora could not tell if they were tattoos or merely some type of temporary henna, which was quite fashionable in Gojin. Nora greeted her with a warm smile and a bright silver coin to show her gratitude. "You must be Nadette." The old woman frowned and regarded the silver in her hand as if she had been holding a bucket full of slugs. "How dare you!" she scowled. Nora had to move fast to avoid getting her hand swatted with a wet wooden spoon, but she was not fast enough to avoid the oatmeal residue splattering her blue silk robe and beautiful fur moccasins that Vila had given her. She stared down and gasped when she saw the gray little oat flecks that marred the rose made from tiny glass beads. The sudden shock and rage she felt was beyond words. Not Traja, not even General Samuel Gordon had managed to bring her this close to tears and fill her with so much rage. Nora's fierce blue eyes narrowed, and she stood up to her full height, and her hand coiled back, threatening to slap the old woman if she continued to advance toward her with her sticky wooden spoon. "Where is Vila? Where is my son?" Nadette demanded. Stricken with shock, Nora gasped as she had been doused with a bucket of ice water. Immediately she stepped back, and the hand that had been poised to slap her mother-in-law shot upward and covered her gaping mouth. With wooden spoon in hand, Nadette advanced, and Nora wilted out of her way as Vila's mother barged into the yurt. "Where is he?" she demanded. "You called out his name, I heard you," she insisted angrily. Nora's face flashed bright red. "What? How long have you been out here?" she demanded. But this wasn't the answer Nadette wanted to hear. She pivoted back around, waddled outside, and brandished her wooden spoon toward her as if it was some kind of weapon. "Where is my son, you no-good witch?" she demanded. Nora had never been called such a derogatory name in her life. At least, not to her face by another grown adult, anyway. She was an educated war mage, not some old hag with some gimmick of reading tea leaves and seeing the future through crystal balls and cat scat. "For your information, I am a mage. I've been taught by the greatest mages in all of Marne. Vila is my sword companion, and if you so much as touch me again—" Nora hesitated. She wasn't entirely sure what she would do. Menru grant her mercy. She couldn't harm Vila's mother. Not physically, anyway. "If you so much as touch me, or call me that again, I will not tell you where your son is," she threatened. Nadette became still. Her dark, wild, beady eyes glared up at her, and she planted her hands on her hips. Nora ignored the bits of oatmeal that squished between her fingers as she folded her arms over herself, striking an air of confidence and assuming supreme victory. "Oh, forgive me. I didn't see your mage staff. Did you bring it with you?" the old woman asked. Nora smirked as she heard the inflection of worry in her voice. "For what?" she scoffed. The old woman's beady black eyes didn't blink as she gazed up at her and replied with a darkly amused calm voice. "For your protection, sweet child." Nora felt a chill run down her spine when she sensed power radiating from the old woman, but it was gone as soon as she detected it. Refusing to be cowed, Nora stood her ground. "I didn't even know Vila had a mother. He never mentioned you at all. How do I know you are his real mother?" she asked with a dismissive sniff as she idly glanced toward her fingernails. Nadette's confident demeanor faded, and if it was at all possible, her beady black eyes darkened, and she became downcast, and she turned to walk away. Nora immediately wished she could cram the ugly words back into her mouth, but it was too late, and she had to run to catch up with her. "Wait, don't go," she shouted as she waded through fresh, ankle-deep snow that melted into her moccasins. "I'm so sorry. That was an awful lie. He talks about you often," she apologized. "Vila said he was going on a pilgrimage to Helvisti. He'll be back soon," she added. Nadette turned and smiled back up at her daughter-in-law. "Please forgive me, Mother Nadette," Nora begged. Nadette gave a wounded but kindly smile toward Nora. "It is I that must beg your forgiveness, sweet child," she insisted. Tears welled up in Nora's eyes, and she quickly shook her head. "No, not at all. You didn't do anything wrong," she assured her, and gave her a warm embrace. "Oh, but I did," she groaned wretchedly. "It's nothing, sweet mother. It is but water under the bridge. Please come inside and have some tea," she insisted. Nadette gave her a kindly smile. "Oh, dear, I would love to, but I can't," she lamented. "Why ever not, sweet mother?" "Because I set your yacht on fire," Nadette confessed. Nora spun around. Black plumes of smoke rose into the air as great yellow flames rose and lapped at the canvas. "Oh, if I be a properly trained mage like you, I would have put it out, I swear I would," Nadette lamented. But Nora was already frantically sprinting back across the courtyard, desperately trying to beat out the flames with her robe. She at least had her chemise beneath it, and sacrificing her robe to save everything else inside was a small price she was willing to pay. Thankfully, Nadette, despite being the one setting her cozy yurt on fire, came to the rescue with a large wooden bucket of water. While the yurt was utterly ruined and a giant gaping black hole allowed for wind, rain, and snow to come through, most of her belongings, minus her singed robe, were able to be rescued. It wasn't long until Nora sat shivering with a large fur blanket over herself inside her ruined yurt, panting softly as little flurries continued to circle down inside. Nadette meekly set a large wooden bowl of oatmeal down in front of Nora, and quietly joined her on the other blackened chair next to the gaping hole in the yurt. Nora quietly warmed her shivering pink fingertips onto the wooden bowl. Once her breathing slowed, something struck her as quite odd. She glanced toward the arsonist, who also happened to be her mother-in-law, with suspicion. Such a frail old woman. Nora would have gotten a water bucket as well, but there hadn't been time. Everything would have been lost. "How did you draw the water so fast?" The wrinkly old crone stared at her with shocked, frightened, beady little black eyes. "I got it from the well nearby, dearest child," she responded meekly. Nora's eyes narrowed with suspicion. She didn't say anything. She looked away and briefly glanced down at her short little legs dangling from the chair. She couldn't help but wonder how a woman so tiny could give birth to such a great hulking beast of a man. Still, those hard, determined, ebony black eyes definitely seemed to run in the family. "Are you planning on having any children soon?" Nadette inquired. Completely taken off guard, Nora blinked, shocked at the question. I sometime soon, but we have been so busy," she lied. Truthfully, they had been trying for some time. The thought saddened her and made her feel uncomfortable. Nadette smiled and nodded approvingly, most likely taking the answer however she wanted to hear it. "I, of course, can't raise children in a charred yurt," she added pointedly. Nadette wilted under the accusatory glare. Nora straightened up. Finally, she was victorious, and she wasn't ever going to let her live it down. "So, does Vila know any magic like you do?" she asked curiously. Nadette gripped her wooden spoon and began to fidget. "Well, not like you and I have," she replied. "Would you like some tea, daughter?" Nora was a bit surprised by the statement. The old hag was addressing her as if she were somehow equals. No, she was actually talking down to her. That was what she was really doing. "Would you like white or black tea, star child," came Nadette's disturbingly calm, soothing, motherly voice inside her head. Nora bristled. Suddenly she felt violated, dirty, and then very angry. "How dare you!" she exclaimed. "Is this your first time away from Founder's Keep, child?" Nadette teased. Nora wanted to throw the oatmeal at her, but right then Nadette came in with a piping hot kettle of tea. Nora did not remember the kettle. Nadette had somehow boiled the water without even uttering a single spell. She didn't even have a wand. She warily eyed the large wooden spoon in Nadette's shriveled hand. "How did—" she began, but she glanced away. She had just, after all, put out the fire, and she couldn't exactly challenge her mother-in-law to a mage duel. What would she tell Vila when he got back? "Sorry, I set your mother on fire, but you could have told me she was a witch." Nadette's beady black eyes sparkled like black diamonds. Nora suddenly felt very uncomfortable. "What do you mean? Does Vila know magic or not?" she pressed, determined to speak everything up front, to keep from having her mind probed. Magic is everywhere, child. In every breath, in every word, every thought, song and dance, in the wind, fire and stone," she answered calmly. Nora bridled her tongue. She had quickly learned in Founder's Keep as an apprentice mage that magic wasn't at all wishy-washy as some might think it was. Every crusty old soothsayer and charlatan would have said some version of what Nadette had just said. "Have you ever seen Vila cold? Ever seen him come back from a hunt empty-handed?" Nadette asked with a secret smug smile on her face. Nora wriggled about in her chair, but she could not deny it. She had assumed Vila was just tough as nails. Well, he was, but there was plenty of strong men who couldn't do what he could. Vila could go out and walk barefoot on ice as if it were summer out. It was then she felt cheated and angry. "But Vila said he had to complete his pilgrimage without magic!" she exclaimed. Nadette gave a long, thoughtful hum and an amused tisk with the few remaining snaggled teeth she had. "Some magic is more natural than others and isn't appreciated by the big book mages, so I could see why he might say that, so you wouldn't feel offended," she sighed. Nora glowered at the old woman. "Do you need any help coaxing the dragon out?" Nadette inquired with a secret smile, as she blew on the hot cup of tea in her hands before taking a sip. "Did Vila put you up to this?" Nora demanded. Nadette's beady black eyes peered from over the rim of her white porcelain cup as she took another contemplative sip. Nora waited for an answer, but the old woman held her silence. "No, I don't need your help," Nora insisted, and then paused. "And what would you know about dragons anyway? How could you possibly help me? Have you ever ridden a dragon before?" she inquired. Nadette smiled as she neatly set the empty teacup on the table. "I understand," she said at last, and rose from her chair. "My apologies again for the tent. It was very childish of me," she added as she tucked her wooden spoon away, fetched her cane, and hopped onto her mule, and commenced the slow trek back down the winding mountainside road. Just when Nora let out an agitated sigh of relief, she heard the distant threshing of dragon wings beating in the air. Part of her panicked as she half expected to see the horrid, crusty old crone taking off via dragon. But when she looked up, her eyes became alight with excitement as she immediately recognized Prince. Chapter 17. A Friend Indeed. Simmons' dragon circled around as he prepared to land. Just when Nora was about to wave, the sudden gust of cold air reminded her that she was only in a silk nightgown that barely reached midway down her thighs. In a panic, Nora rushed over to her wardrobe and quickly jumped into her forest green trousers. No time to find anything else, she changed from her wet leather moccasins into her riding boots, threw her red scarf and white mink coat on, and ran out to meet him. It seemed like ages since the last time she had seen anyone from Glendon or Founder's Keep. Simmons was like a brother to her. After old man Don Rascal passed away, he was the glue that kept everyone together. Nora grinned. She didn't even care about being blasted by the wind and snow from his dragon's powerful wings. The moment the tall, spindly man hopped down, she greeted him with an embrace. "Simmons! Sprigga be praised! What are you doing here?" she gasped. While she was happy to see him, she began to worry something dreadful might have happened. Simmons let out a hearty chuckle as he put up his frost-rimmed riding goggles. "Not to worry, I'm just here to visit," he assured her. "You flew so far? How long are you staying?" she asked. Simmons chuckled. "Nonsense. Prince was happy to get the exercise after being cooped up so long." Nora beamed happily as she hurriedly led Simmons over to the nesting area so she could tend to the excited young bull drake and helped him take off the saddlebags and unbuckle the saddle. "You must be starving," Nora chimed excitedly, but her excitement melted away into absolute dread. At that moment, all she had to offer her dear friend and dragon rider was in her charred yurt. Simmons grinned and glanced about, smiling up at the large mansion in front of him. "I'm famished," he chuckled, and glanced over toward the nervous Nora, who was shifting about worriedly in the snow, and turned and saw the blackened little yurt in the courtyard. "Would you like some tea and oatmeal?" she ventured. Simmons blinked. He looked at the boarded-up mansion. He looked at the charred yurt. He looked back at the mansion, and then back at the yurt. All right," he agreed. He was clearly curious, but out of pure politeness, decided not to ask. "Whoa, this is really tasty. It's been ages since I've had a good bowl of oatmeal. Nothing like it after a long flight," he chimed happily. Nora forced herself to smile. "Did you make it yourself?" he asked. Nora's smile stiffened as she fidgeted with the silver teaspoon on the little round table. Not exactly. My mother-in-law came to visit. You just missed her," she explained. "Ah, I see you're testing to make sure it's not poisoned, aren't you?" he remarked sarcastically. Nora abruptly burst out laughing and quickly settled down after noting the worried expression on her friend's face. "No, of course not," she teased, and quickly ladled in some oatmeal into her own bowl, stabbing it with her spoon as she smiled over toward Simmons. Aren't you going to eat any?" Simmons asked. Nora glanced down. I'm just letting it cool down," she insisted, as she ventured a tiny bite of the heavily salted oatmeal. Simmons offered a nervous smile, and then resigned himself to his fate and polished off the rest of the oatmeal. "So," he glanced upward at the burn hole in the side of the yurt. "Yes, there was a small fire," Nora confessed. Simmons nodded. I see that. Anything I can do to help? He asked. Nora shook her head and sighed. No. Supposedly, the dragon that I have been assigned to is a cantankerous little snood. And General Gordon thought it would be a good idea to seal him up inside the mansion so he couldn't get out and terrorize the townsfolk, she explained. Simmons grimaced. I see. This sounds like a problem dragon, he remarked. Nora nodded. Until I figure out what to do with him, I'm stuck in this little charred hut. All the staff have long gone, and they probably won't be back until I'm able to reclaim the estate. She sighed and quickly brightened up. She didn't want to overburden her friend after traveling so far to see her. How about you? What's new with you? She asked. Simmons smiled. Well, we've had some interesting events happen over at Founders. Do you remember that bull drake that attacked you? She asked. Nora's smile faded. Clearly she had. Simmons grimaced, suddenly feeling rather foolish for even bringing up the sensitive topic, but it was too late now. Well, it came back, so we had to keep everyone grounded until we were finally able to deal with it, he explained. Did you kill it? Nora asked. Simmons grimaced. Not exactly. Irene convinced the team to let her try and call it in, he confessed. Nora's thin nostrils flared as she sat back in her chair, clearly frazzled and very upset. Are you serious? Simmons nodded. So far, things have gone well. Warren took Rex to Gojin, and I took the long route to come check on you, he smiled. Nora tried to smile back. She was happy to see Simmons. But the thought of Golden Eyes' killer being called in and serenaded by the empty-headed young twit with the harp seemed so wrong on so many levels. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought that up, Simmons apologized. That creature is evil. It will turn on you, she warned. I'm worried as well, but everyone is keeping close watch, he assured her. Nora responded with a long, deep, agitated sigh that was followed by a sharp, uncomfortable silence. There wasn't anything she could do or say that would improve things. She was, for the time being, effectively and indefinitely banished from Founders for life, or until something so dreadful happened that she had to scold herself and shudder for even thinking or finding pleasure in such a dark thought. A long, deep blast of a ram's horn resonated from on top of the great Helvisti lighthouse. Shortly after, a dozen riders came galloping hard down the winding trail and past the open gate. Simmons turned to Nora, but she shook her head. She had no idea what was going on. Perhaps a drill, she suggested, but just as she spoke, one of the riders in a dappled gray mare peeled off and rode into the courtyard. Both Nora and Simmons rose to their feet. Bad news! There's trouble in Glendon! General Gordon has ordered every regiment to send one battalion to assist any way they can. This order is effective immediately, the messenger declared. Simmons' face grew gaunt and pale. He turned toward Nora as she grimly accepted the sealed document. She could tell the orders had been written with great haste. Inside, the ink had barely a chance to dry. While it had taken a single day for Simmons to fly over, it would take well over 2 weeks to get there by ferry. and a month to march overland. As she remembered Vila telling her the Helvesti Straits would freeze during the winter. It was absolutely wretched to imagine how cold it had to get for salt water to freeze. Regardless, any fighting forces would arrive too late. Nora took in a deep breath as she sat down at her little table and found a quill and inkwell inside the small wooden box. "Whoever I send will arrive late," she mused out loud. She pressed the feather to her forehead that was visibly creased with lines of grim, palatable concern. But perhaps if Major Gustavo and his engineers hurry, he'll be in time to patch things up, she declared as she finished writing the orders and then finally stamped the envelope with her personal signet ring that had an image of a sleeping dragon on top of an eight-pointed nautical star. "What is your name, messenger?" Nora demanded. "I'm Sergeant Bascom, Magi," he declared. "Sergeant Bascom, you will personally deliver this and report back to me with a personal, signed, and sealed letter of confirmation. Do you understand?" she insisted sternly. "Understood, Magi." Nora grimly handed over the orders. "See to it," she commanded. Bascom stuffed the orders into his coat and gave a swift salute before urging his horse forward. Once the messenger was gone, Nora turned worriedly back over toward Simmons. His face was gaunt, and he looked as if he would be ill. "You shouldn't go yet. At least wait till nightfall. It might be nothing, and if you go now, you wouldn't have the strength to do anything, or be any use to anyone when you arrived." Simmons shook his head. "Torn was right. I have to go. I have to deal with the consequences." "If it's the dragon, there's nothing you can do. If it's still out there, it'll just kill you. And Prince, we can't afford to lose you," Nora shouted after him. Simmons pulled away from her and threw open the heavy wooden doors. "You would have told me to do the same," Nora insisted. "And you would have ignored me," Simmons grunted. "Not if Don Rascal were here, you wouldn't." Simmons stiffened. Old man Don Rascal had been a second father to everyone. "He's dead," he replied, but the sternness in his voice wavered. She had hit her mark. "And Torn? If Torn was here instead of me?" she asked. Simmons stoically grabbed his saddle from on top of the wooden barrel. "What if you had lost Prince, and you were in my place? And Torn was going out as well," she pleaded. Simmons slowed, and a grim smile formed across his lips. "Torn wouldn't listen to anyone," he chuckled. "He would have listened to you. Besides, both you and your dragon are worn out," Nora insisted, as she pointed toward Prince, who was curled up in a tight ball. Simmons turned and glanced toward his dragon. One big sleepy eyelid drowsily peered up at him. "All right, just for the day," he agreed. Nora's smile all but vanished as Prince's long, lithy neck leaned up over the wooden panels and snatched up the leather saddle. Simmons shouted in surprise. "Hey, no, that's not a chew toy, damn it!" he snapped. Prince spat out the saddle and let out a flustered blast from his nostrils. "Impressive. He actually listened," Nora marveled. Simmons grimaced as he glanced at the bite marks all over the leather saddle. "Not exactly. I just saturated the leather with the worst tasting thing imaginable," he explained. "What is that?" she asked. "Oil of dragon's bane," he declared. Nora frowned. Dragon's bane was extremely toxic. But won't that? She began worriedly. Not if you dilute it. It's just enough to ruin his day, Simmons explained proudly. Nora wasn't entirely sure what to make of this, but she was happy Simmons wasn't going to rush back. Such a long flight in itself could be deadly even without other complications and feral dragons attacking him. Judging by the tired rings in his eyes, Simmons hadn't slept at all last night, or the night before. All it would take was for him to drift to sleep and plummet to his death, and no one would ever know what had happened to him or where to find him. "Where did you learn that?" she demanded. Simmons grinned. "I raise sheep in Takron. It's an old trick," he declared. Nora's eyes went wide. "When was this?" she spluttered. "I thought everyone knew," Simmons laughed. "Of course, it's a win-win for everyone. The shepherds don't want to leave their flock to go all the way into town every time their sheep get snatched, and I don't particularly care to pay 10 times the amount for some shepherd's prized ram or ewe. Somehow, dragons always seem to eat the expensive prized winning sheep," he chuckled. "But that could make them horribly sick. It's not like we can't afford to compensate them. We always do," Nora protested. Simmons nodded. "Well, that might be true in some provinces, but in Takron there are lots of mountains, hills, and caves. As you can imagine, it's prime hunting grounds for feral dragons, and you can't complain or get money out of a feral dragon. It's also illegal to kill them, so the next best thing is to discourage them. Luckily, most dragons are quick learners," he explained, and let out a big, tired yawn. Nora shook her head and sighed. "You need to rest. I'll get you some blankets, and you can sleep in the hayloft. It will be warm up there," she insisted. Simmons chuckled. "Where are you going to sleep?" he teased. Nora glared at him. "While you get some rest, I'm going to give this problem dragon his eviction notice, and hopefully by tonight I will be curled up in a nice feather bed in front of a bright, warm fireplace," she announced confidently. "Need any help?" Simmons asked. Nora smiled. "Yes, get some sleep. And if you find that everything is in order in Glendon, please relay the message to Major Gustavo and save him some traveling. I'm already short-handed as it is. But as for today, I need the dragon to focus on me, and right now, you'll just be a sleepy, sluggish liability and major distraction," she insisted as she pushed him toward the hayloft. Simmons grinned. "All right. Try not to set anything on fire," he encouraged her. Chapter 18. Into the Dragon's Den. Vanity. All was vanity. Nora made one last glance toward her reflection in the slender, full-length mirror. She couldn't help but feel a little silly for taking so long getting dressed. After all, she wasn't going far, and she was only going to be seeing the troublesome dragon. Nora quickly reminded herself to keep on task. Even still, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. The woman in the mirror quirked her brow, giving her a pointed look of disapproval. Nora turned. "I know it's tacky. That's the point," she snapped at her reflection, and then groaned. While her green, loose-fitting trousers were warm, they poofed over her black riding boots, and her large green tunic went all the way down past her knees. Well, technically, it was Vila's shirt, but that's what he got for going without her. Nora stepped back and let out a frazzled sigh. She felt like a big green bush. Still, she had a bloody good reason. If she had anything sparkly on, any glint of metal or jewelry, or abnormal garments and bright colors, the dragon might be distracted. Dragons were a lot like ravens. They were entitled little thieves that stole everything, and anything that wasn't nailed down. She let out another disgruntled sigh while adding a simple black leather belt which kept her long tunic from looking like a bush. Now she felt more like a rumpled evergreen. With one last quick shimmy, she turned away from the mirror. This would have to do until she could go shopping. In her hurry to leave, she had left so many things back in Glendon, but she was too proud and too bitter to send a letter to ask for her things back. Ready to go, she grabbed her mage's staff. The staff was made out of carved maple that was stained with a dark maroon color. While the staff looked mysterious, it didn't have any powers. Staves and wands merely acted as tools of leverage and focus, much like a shepherd's rod or sling. Other mages preferred wands, as they were typically more portable, but when it came to dealing with dragons, Nora preferred to have as much leverage as she could possibly get. A white, frosty cloud of mist huffed and puffed from her lips as she waded through the snow until finally she reached the small side door. Nora muttered under her breath as she was about to lift the brass door knocker. "Son of Maltine! Why am I knocking on my own bloody house?" she scolded herself. It was already bad enough to have to enter through the servants' quarters, but the last thing she wanted was the dragon getting loose until she knew how big of a problem dragon she was dealing with first. However, when she attempted to open the door, she found it was frozen shut. Being an elemental mage, this was not a problem for her. The only difficult part was finding heat in the already cold climate. Any self-made witch could light a candle flame, but when it came to anything larger, she had to draw the heat from someplace else. A little body heat to ignite a candle wick was nothing. Unthawing a frozen door? Well, that was a little more complicated. If she used her own body heat, she would likely succeed, and then shortly die from hyperthermia. Instead, Nora set the end of her staff onto the door and channeled the heat from the ambient air around her and funneled it through the shaft. Ice crystals formed on the short, twisted roots on the heavy top end, and hot plumes of steam billowed out at the bottom. With a little bit of pressure, the door gently gave away. Nora cautiously peered into the abandoned kitchen and smiled as she tapped the frosted top knot of her staff onto the door frame and broke away the ice shell like brittle sugar candy, and neatly sidestepped over a fallen pan that still lay on the floor. "Well, it seems like everything's still here," she mused out loud. She supposed there was one nice thing about having a dragon living in her house. It certainly kept the looters away. Any other abandoned building would have been stripped bare, and all the windows would have been broken. The question was, should she go up or down? If I was a dragon, where would I be, she wondered. Better question, Where could I fit, and where would I want to go? She corrected herself. Judging by how intact the kitchen was, she was quite sure it hadn't been able to fit through the single doors, or at least it hadn't tried hard enough yet. She couldn't help but smile. If Torrin was with her, he would have insisted they check the cellar first. While Nora disapproved of his horrible drinking habit, she couldn't help but wonder what else was in the cellar. Maybe she would find some bread, or strawberry preserve, or... Nora shook her head. "Stay focused," she insisted. The sooner she got her house in order, the sooner she would be sleeping in a nice, warm feather bed, and she would have servants bringing her as much strawberry preserve on piping hot, fresh toast as she wanted. She wrinkled her nose. She could already smell Vila's pickled sardines. Gross. Still, the thought of Vila coming back and seeing her in the little burnt-up shack was all the more motivation to keep herself on task. Once she made her way into the entry, she quickly spotted the sign of dragon. But even without the large scratch marks on the marble floors and the stone columns, all she had to do was look up and see the gaping hole in the large vaulted ceiling where the chandelier had been torn down from. This didn't nearly offend her as much as the obnoxious lime green-colored walls. She made a mental note to repaint everything. Keeping focused, Nora readied herself in case she needed to throw up a defensive barrier. This barrier was considered to be an advanced technique, even for experienced elementals like herself. Some mages called it soul magic. The best way Nora could describe the soul barrier was that it was like a blanket of millions of tiny interlocking rings of energy that could take any form. It wasn't telekinesis. Telekinesis required someone to be aware of any incoming object. With this ability, so long as she had the strength and concentration to keep it up, she could block anything, even if it came from behind her. But she had to be careful. Nothing could breach the barrier. Not even her. Nora had learned this the hard way. It felt like she had been struck by a mini bolt of lightning, and had sent her flying back a whole 10 feet. Luckily for her, the moment she touched the barrier was the exact moment she lost control of it. It had not been pleasant, and she had the taste of burnt copper in her mouth for weeks, and whomever she greeted got a nasty little shock. This, of course, was while she was still an apprentice mage. She might have been in trouble if the instructors hadn't been so impressed. Instead, she was sent away to the special dormitories with the rest of the special apprentices, affectionately known as the firebugs, or the wizards. To this day, Nora had to repress the violent urges she felt when anyone ever addressed her, or even asked the instant question if she was a wizard or not. There were many other smaller, illegitimate schools in Marn. Those were wizards. Idiots that could call down lightning and set themselves on fire. Founders Keep trained mages. A proper mage was a well-rounded and formally trained in all aspects of magic. Mages were learned, educated, upright individuals that pledged to use their abilities to serve their nation. Wizards went about wearing funny hats stuffed full of bizarre ideas and smelly, dirty robes, and had crumbs stuck in their beards, and said, "Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Please let me try again." Nora pursed her lips and glanced up at the well-traveled twin staircase and turned to the broken-down double doors leading into the dining hall. She was quite confident wherever her chandelier had been taken was where she would find her dragon. Up or down. Don Rascal always advised his novice riders against putting themselves between their dragon and a hard place. Nora smiled. Old man Don Rascal would have chosen to search the top floors first. Dragons were extremely dangerous from above, and especially in close, confined spaces. If Nora had to get out quickly, she didn't want to be running blindly into a broom closet or trapped in a room without any windows. If the dragon came up from behind while she was upstairs, there'd always be a window she could escape through. If she did find the dragon upstairs and things went poorly, she could always go back the way she had come. This would not be possible if the dragon came down while she continued straight ahead into the dining hall. "I better not find you in my bedroom," Nora muttered to herself. Alas, the double doors had been broken down, and the only thing left intact was... No, there was nothing intact. "You little thieving troll," she gasped. While there was no dragon to be found, the bed frame had been torn apart, and all the pillows and blankets had been hauled off. Most likely, he had built a nice little nest for himself somewhere, and was curled up all warm and comfy with her chandeliers. After searching the guest rooms, she quickly found the same pattern repeated everywhere. Sometimes she wished she had been part of a canine unit or worked with horses. Stay focused, Nora told herself. It was fairly obvious that the dragon was not in the upper rooms, and she doubted it would try to squeeze itself into the attic. The attic was another place she would have to explore once she had tamed the dragon, and the house finally belonged to her. Nora couldn't help but pause and straighten the picture before leaving the guest bedroom and turned to head back downstairs. It was silly, but the painting reminded her of Warren. She hoped he was well. Making her way back down the winding stairs, Nora was surprised she hadn't gotten the dragon's attention yet. She figured it was either sleeping or hiding on top of its mound of plundered sparkles. She smiled. In the legends, dragons were supposed to hoard gold and gems. But in reality, it was probably just a pile of junk. Bits of debris crunched and echoed under her boots as she entered the dining hall. "You little toad," Nora murmured as she glanced up at the gaping hole in the white plaster, where an even larger chandelier had been ripped down from the ceiling. Her sky-blue eyes narrowed as she spotted the scratch marks where it had been dragged away. Judging by the hole in the ceiling, it had been enormous. It perhaps may have even been beautiful at one time. Nora leaned on her staff and thoughtfully glanced around the dance floor. She wondered if she could get Vila to dance. She hadn't been dancing in such a long time. Vila was very handsome when he was in a suit and his hair was combed. The thought made her smile, but she doubted she would get him to go dancing with her. Unless she told him they were looking for Droon spies, and she desperately needed his protection. Nora paused and held her breath. If the dragon had been sleeping, she was quite certain she would have heard its loud breathing by now. She was close, and she could sense it, yet somehow she knew the dragon was aware of her as well. Most likely, it was hiding or guarding its treasure. Something shimmered in the gloom. Nora lit a candle and her eyes went wide. On the floor, dozens of round, teardrop-shaped, white pearl discs shimmered like abalone. These were scales. Dragon scales. The energy and beautiful aura that it emitted was breathtaking. No doubt, the dragon had been using the sharp corners to shed its scales. She had heard stories, even read books of ice dragons, but she hadn't believed them, or at least didn't think they still existed. She had flown through the snowy mountains and landed on the glaciers many times while patrolling northern London. Nora chuckled softly. I'm being silly. It could just be a rare albino, she told herself. She had heard of those, and even seen one before. Had been a nasty, moody creature that liked to steal everything. But it made sense. The people in Helvesty probably saw it as some sort of snow god and spoiled it rotten. Nora shook her head and slipped the scales into her pocket. Well, that's going to end, she declared. Once she was around the bend, the temperature in the room began to rise as she walked into the large steam-filled room and shook her head. At the center was a large, warm mineral hot spring tapped directly from the mountain. On the far corner, to her right, she spotted the dragon's nest. Nora quickly recognized the ruined, musty bedding. It was filled with heaps of plunder and her beautiful, broken chandeliers. Now that she had found the nest, she knew the dragon had to be close by, and she didn't have time to admire the beautiful tilework in the dome ceiling above. Nora eyed the misty pool suspiciously. Sunlight streamed down from the oculus window and danced and twisted within the rising cloud of white mist coming from the natural mineral spring. Oh dear! I wonder where you could be hiding, Nora cooed in a patronizing sing-song voice. She knew exactly where the dragon was hiding. With poised anticipation, she summoned in a gust of warm air from behind her and swept away the thick veil of mist. Two big obsidian eyes gazed up at her from the calm water's surface. Only its snout and a shimmering white crown of horns poked out of the pool. Nora tilted her head. By the fully developed crown, she could tell there was a large, fully mature dragon waiting beneath the murky green mineral water. While she couldn't know for certain, by the soft ridges and a slimmer jawline and shy behavior, she most likely was dealing with a Hendrick. This, of course, didn't mean less dangerous. It just meant she could expect more passive aggression. Most males would have attempted to chase her out by now. But this dragon was patiently waiting to spring an ambush. Nora smiled. You are a very strange dragon, she teased, as she prepared an invisible barrier around herself. But she had to be careful. She could only maintain the protective ward for up to a minute without severe health risks. But she was fairly certain, by the dragon's cagey body language, she was going to need it soon. The dragon stared back at her. Its pitch-black eyes were wide and hyper-vigilant. You have made a very big mess, Nora cooed. The dragon hissed at her agitatedly. Instead of backing away, Nora stepped toward the nest. The dragon attacked and let out a snarled yelp as it slammed its snout into the invisible barrier. If the dragon had been dealing with anyone else, it would have bitten their head off and tossed their mangled body about like a rag doll, without so much as a second thought. Nora smiled with satisfaction as she allowed the barrier to fall away. She couldn't hold it for long, and she didn't want to become overly fatigued. "Oh my, what have you got piled up over there?" Nora mused out loud. The dragon hissed, but the moment it could lunge at her again, she spun around and gave it a good rap on the snout with her staff. "No," Nora commanded sternly. She didn't raise her voice. She wanted the dragon to get used to following commands without her shouting. Dragons had very good hearing, and she would only look like an absolute lunatic if she went about shouting at the poor thing all the time. The dragon quickly recoiled and slipped back into the pool, albeit the loud snarl and menacing open jaws showed that this little feud between them was not over. Once again she spoke in a calm but stern voice. "No," she commanded, knowing full well that the dragon would try to attack again. She gripped her staff and focused once more. Once the barrier was in place, she turned her back, daring the dragon to come at her again. However, instead of biting her like last time, she suddenly found herself completely and utterly engulfed in white mist. Nora gasped in shock as a thick dome of ice rapidly crystallized around her ward. The barrier had saved her from being turned into an ice sculpture, but now she was trapped. The dragon let out an excited, chortling growl as it came at her again. Too dazed to keep the barrier up and unable to get away, Nora threw herself to the ground and held up her staff, ready to kill it if she had to. But the dragon was not able to break through. She could see the vivid silhouette of the rows of large, curved, dagger-like teeth scraping on the outer surface. Right then, she realized the dome of ice was too large for the dragon to wrap its jaws around, and all it could do was scratch and slobber. Once she realized she had time to recover, she suddenly became aware that the dragon had not breathed fire. "Amazing!" she marveled. This was absolutely amazing. All she had to do was break free and not die, and she might actually be able to tell somebody about it. Winter was a frost dragon. Yes, that was going to be her name until she could come up with something more original. Winter growled back at her, but before the dragon could climb out of the pool and crack open the ice bubble with its large talons, Nora set the top of her staff on the ceiling of the ice dome and quickly melted a small little hole on top. Knowing full well she would be killed the second she popped her head out, she sent a little grape-sized fireball floating up into the air. Winter eyed the little flame with suspicion and instinctively snapped at it. But the moment she did, there was a second and then a third circling around her head. The dragon growled angrily and snapped again and again until she became so frustrated she forgot all about the mage in front of her. "I said no," Nora shouted as she sprang free and walloped Winter over the snout for a second time. Winter yelped and Nora nodded in satisfaction, but it wasn't long before the disgruntled dragon began to size her up again. "No?" she repeated, this time in a softer, gentler voice. However, when she tried to move toward the dragon's nest, Winter let out a shrill howl, and this time she quickly swam over to the water's edge and blocked Nora's path, using her full body. As she fanned out her massive white velvet wings and raised up on her haunches to brandish claws and long, menacing whip-like tail. "Those are my blankets and my chandeliers," Nora insisted. While both bedding and chandeliers were ruined, She was merely trying to prove a point. Winter lashed at the mage with her tail, but Nora calmly passed behind the large pillar, allowing the dragon's tail to glance off the marble. Nora continued to advance. The dragon's nostrils flared. The moment the mage moved out into the open, Winter lashed out again. A wall of blue sparks sprayed up into the air as her tail connected with the invisible ward. Winter yelped as she recoiled her singed tail. Nora sighed. "You're being difficult," she scolded. This was an understatement. Any other mage would have been forced to kill the poor Hendrik. Not many could outcast her. Well, there was one she knew of, Magi Hendricks. He was the head dueling mage at Founders. The man could vaporize 2 arrows in mid-flight. While Nora couldn't exactly communicate telepathically to dragons like Simmons could, she was quite capable of stating her intentions and understanding theirs. Like any other living creature, it was really about tone and body language, and right now, Winter was very, very upset and frightened. And by the way the Hendrik was puffing out her chest and coiled back, she was gathering her strength for another frost attack. "No," Nora whispered in a soft, stern warning. The dragon didn't listen. But this time, instead of staying on the defensive and getting stuck inside the ice ball again, Nora drew upon the plentiful heat rising from the mineral spring and struck back. A river of fire and frost clashed together. The dragon's roar was loud, long, and terrible. But Nora had the advantage. The dragon could only sustain what its massive lungs could spew. Finally, the dragon was forced to breathe, and when it did, it inhaled a mouthful of white steam that burnt her tongue and scalded her throat. Not badly, but enough to be very uncomfortable. Winter quickly recoiled and huddled its head down low, finally accepting defeat. Its frightened, big black eyes gazed up at her. Nora set her staff down and panted softly. She was fatigued and drenched with sweat, but she wasn't about to show weakness now. When she tried to move forward, Winter used her large, shimmering, white scaly body to block her path, albeit this time her posture remained low and submissive. It was clear the dragon had lost the will to fight, but Winter was still stubbornly trying to block the path to her nest full of treasured sparkles, even if only passively laying in front of it. Nora sighed and glared at the dragon, and impatiently tapped her foot. Winter's tail swiveled back around. Nora prepared to charge the energy field again, but instead of trying to take her head off, the dragon set a small, broken crystal fragment down at the mage's feet. While it was a mere fraction of the 2 massive crystal chandeliers piled up in her nest, it was still a nice gesture. "Thank you, Winter. You are very generous," Nora praised her, but instead of picking up the crystal, she reached down and gently stroked the frost dragon's tender snout. Surprisingly, despite the wintry appearance, the frost dragon's soft nostrils were quite warm to the touch. For a moment, she shied away, but Winter finally settled down and allowed Nora to continue to stroke her. Nora smiled when Winter's big black eyes began to close. "You aren't so mean, are you?" Nora cooed softly. "You like water." And all the stupid heads were giving you nasty dry ashes, weren't they? She whispered. She wasn't sure if Winter could understand, but the dragon responded with a low, rumbling whine that seemed to imply she was getting someplace. Well, I can't let you stay in here. You're making an awful mess, she mused out loud, all the while speaking in a rhythmic sing-song voice. Are you hungry? Nora asked. There was no response. She tilted her head to the side. The dragon's eyes were shut, and long and deep rhythmic breaths echoed throughout the marble bathhouse. Fire dragons typically got rather sluggish and sleepy after breathing fire. It wasn't a pleasurable thing for them, and she could only imagine frost dragons might share some of the similarities. I will bring you back something nice, she promised in a soft whisper. Nora straightened up and let out a tired but contented sigh. Things had gone surprisingly well. So long as she didn't try to move the dragon from the hot springs, she and Winter would get along swimmingly. Now she had to crack some human heads and twist some arms to have the whole bloody damned mansion and the dragon stalls remodeled to accommodate a frost dragon. The bloody fools had no idea what they were dealing with. Admittedly, she had no idea either, but it was obvious. Winter liked warm water. Supposedly, the Baru waste was full of mineral springs. She couldn't help but wonder how many more frost dragons could be out there. Everyone always looked in the mountains and cliffs for dragons, and she felt a little bit silly for even thinking of fire dragons as being normal. Even they were endangered and hard to find, but compared to Winter was truly one of a kind. She had never thought any creature could ever take Golden Eye's place. She knew Winter never would, but after meeting the hendrake, she was already attached and very upset at how the poor dragon was being treated. Nora smiled as she exited the same way she had come. She was surprised how long she had been inside. It had felt like only a few hours, but the sun was already starting to go down, and there was still so much to do. Nora marched through the snow-filled courtyard, but right when she came to the main gate, her smile fell away. She couldn't wear this. She quickly turned back around and ran to her burnt-up yurt and began rummaging through her travel chests. Dealing with her new dragon was only half the battle. She hadn't packed any of her nice dresses. That entitled green-eyed toad, Irene, was probably rummaging through her closet right now. None of her dresses would fit her, of course. Irene was much shorter. This didn't help make Nora feel any better, as this meant Irene would have to cut them off at the knee to make them fit. Being so tall, it was nearly impossible to find clothes her size. It had also been the reason why she hadn't chosen her sword companion from the myriad of skilled young warriors at Founder's training yard. Despite being wonderful in almost every way, Vila was also just the right height to make her feel small. Small in a good way. His massive tattooed arms could utterly engulf her. The very thought made her feel hot and feverish all over. She smiled when she realized Vila was aware of her excitement through the soul bond, and the hug she felt was much more than a fond memory. Nora spun around. She was so excited. The first thing she was going to buy was a horse, for now she would settle with her military dress uniform. That was one outfit she could not throw away or leave behind. Well, not without causing more trouble than it was worth. She grimaced. More green. But at least this fit. She stood a little taller as she fixed the twin silver nautical stars on her high collar that designated her as a mage. The northern point at the top was painted black and blue, indicating she was the member of Dragonhall, and the west wing was painted maroon and turquoise, showing that she was an elemental mage as well. There, of course, were some special snowflakes, wizards like Irene, who did not come from founders, would only a blank silver star. Unless, of course, they were dragon riders. Torn and Warren both weren't mages, yet still were part of Dragonhall, would merely wear a black and blue rectangle bar that was bordered with bronze. The 7 golden bands on Nora's sleeve signified her rank as a war mage. The rank below her was a battle mage, and the rank below a battle mage was a field mage, and so on and so on. Naturally, she never wore her dress uniforms out in the field. These were only used for formal occasions, or when she wanted to strut around and scare everyone half to death during inspections. Nora draped her heavy mage's cloak over her shoulders. Out of shame, she had left her dragon rider's cloak back in Glendon. For now, all she had was her elemental cloak, which was half vibrant turquoise and dark maroon. It didn't go well with the green uniform, but it didn't matter. The moment any soldier saw the golden stripes on her sleeve, they would quickly find something very important to do. Dressing to impress, Nora went to her jewelry box and smiled as she fished out her favorite pearl earrings, and then hesitated. Instead, she found the white dragon scales, and with a little bit of magic and some modification, she gently set aside the loose pearls and hung the dragon scales to her pierced ears. Nora smiled as she turned her head side to side. The scales shimmered like abalone. Don Rascal would not have approved of her wearing dragon scales, but Nora was planning on making the biggest scene imaginable, and she was going to look stunning while doing it. The dragon scales would serve as irrefutable proof that she had met Winter and wasn't merely throwing a tantrum. Naturally, she wanted her house back, but she couldn't move Winter without having some place suitable for housing a frost dragon. The first thing she needed was for another large pool to be dug inside the barn, and the natural hot waters to be diverted so Winter could have a place to stay besides her mansion. Once the dragon had a nice place of her own, Nora could focus on flying. After she was finished looking herself over, Nora quickly bundled herself in a black silk robe. She couldn't go into the barn to get Simmons wearing her dress uniform. Prince would be all sorts of excited, and not in a good way. Once she was covered up in black, Nora marched toward the barn. She beamed happily as she spotted Simmons climbing down from the hayloft. "You're awake," Nora exclaimed. Simmons nodded. "It's almost dark," he lamented. "But you were right. I needed the sleep. I feel a lot better, but I really should be getting back now." "Wonderful. Do you think you can drop me off someplace on your way back by chance?" she asked. Simmons held his belly and laughed. "I know that smile. Whose head are you going to bite off?" he asked. "I am not going to bite anyone's head off. I am just going to have a talk with the mayor. It isn't far. By dragon, it's only 5 minutes away. You could just drop me off and I'll handle the rest," she declared with a fiercely determined grin. "All right, Crazy Eyes. Let me get Prince saddled up and ready to go, he chuckled. Simmons? Yes? Do I really have crazy eyes? Or are you just saying that? She asked weirdly. Vila had mentioned it once, but she had merely laughed. But now Simmons had brought it up as well. She fought the urge to run back to her yurt and check the mirror. Simmons smirked as he quickly secured the last strap to the saddle harness. No, of course not. I was just teasing, he assured her. Nora smiled and let out a sigh of relief. Are you ready to go? He asked. She quickly nodded, and he guided her round back and made sure she was good and secure before getting on himself. Once they were out of the barn and under the open sky, Prince chirped excitedly and stretched out his wings. The little nap had done wonders, and he was ready to fly again. Nora had to hold tight onto Simmons as the dragon's powerful black wings sent them soaring right over the wall and up into the air. Nora looked back. Her poor little burnt-up yurt was now absolutely plastered with snow. But none of that mattered when she saw the city below. Right then, she knew she would triumph. She knew that she would fly again, and one day she might even redeem herself. Soon her determined gaze settled upon the governor's estate below, and she watched with grim satisfaction as the servants went running and the guards held onto their helmets and stared up in dismay. Prince gracefully touched down, just long enough for Nora to hop off while everyone turned away from the swirling gale of wind and snow. Halt! Who goes there? Called a reluctant guard. I am Nora Frey, she declared, and with a dramatic flourish she unclasped her black covering and discarded it on the ground so that all would recognize her uniform. The moment she emerged from the swirling white flurries of snow, the guards immediately snapped to attention, and a servant rushed forward to gather up her discarded black cloak. Who is in charge here? She demanded. Sergeant Monty at your service, Magi, he saluted. This is a very big surprise. We weren't expecting you. I'm so glad you're on our side. Does Governor Von Claris know you're coming? He asked. Who is on watch? Nora demanded. I didn't even hear one alarm or any sound of warning as we approached. If I had been a rival Drune mage, you would all be dead. Nora knew such an attack would never happen. According to Vila, the lands west of them were not controlled by the Drune, and they didn't use magic, and if anything, they might even be considered natural allies against the Drune. But it was the principle that truly mattered. Anything Sergeant Monty was going to say was going to be wrong. She would make certain of it. Sergeant Monty gulped. I will find out at once. You don't know, Nora snapped at him. There is so many high. Disgraceful. You should all be publicly flogged. Sergeant Monty fell to his knees. Please, Magi. It's overcast. The clouds are low. If anyone should take punishment, it should be me. I instructed them to keep watch on the road. That is not necessary. Find those responsible and punish them, Nora commanded. But Sergeant Monte remained on his knees. I am responsible, Magi, he insisted. Nora hesitated and glanced back at him. Most would roll over on their belly, soil themselves, and sacrifice as many subordinates that it would take to appease her. just so they could save their own miserable hides. Well, sometimes Nora felt a little guilty for kicking the regular enlisted soldiers around. She was always surprised to find a few beautiful souls who refused to back down. Strong men, hard men who wouldn't sell out their subordinates no matter how much you twisted their arms and threatened them. "Get on your feet and do as you're told," Nora snapped. Sergeant Monty refused to rise. Nora glanced about. Everyone silently watched. Some of them were even in tears. Nora felt as if she might cry herself, but she wasn't going to. "Master Sergeant Monty, extend your hand," she commanded. Sergeant Monty hesitantly lifted his head, both perplexed by why she had called him by the wrong rank, and yet clearly too frightened to correct her. "I am demoting you to staff sergeant, and I am reassigning you to be the head of security over my own mansion and dragon colony," she declared, and then firmly pressed a heavy gold coin into his gloved hand. Nora smiled as she watched the former Sergeant Monty try to do the math. She had promoted him 2 ranks and demoted him 1. Staff Sergeant Monty stared up at her, his face suddenly alight. "But, Magi, the mansion has been abandoned, and the dragon," he began. Nora Frey smiled as she bid him to rise to his feet. "The dragon is now in good hands, and the mansion is being renovated. I trust you and your men will make certain no one will steal any building supplies," she declared. Staff Sergeant Monty blinked. "When is this happening?" he asked. "I'm confident work will begin first thing tomorrow," she declared, with as much confidence as she could muster. Part of leadership in getting anything started was acting and believing it would be so. "But what about Governor von Claris? I just can't order everyone to leave now, can I?" "I will see that the governor is informed," Nora assured him. "It will be done as you say, Magi." Staff Sergeant Monty saluted. Nora nodded, and when she turned, she was buffeted by the sudden outburst of loud cheers as the guards and servants celebrated the newly promoted Staff Sergeant Monty. When she looked back, she smiled when she saw his men parading their fearless leader about the courtyard like a war hero. But she didn't linger. She had business to attend to. Her long gold trim overcoat glided behind her as she bounded up the stairs, and the servants beamed at her as they gave her the sweeping, glamorous double-door entrance that took both the butler and housekeepers by utter surprise as she came striding unannounced into the vibrant orange marble entry. "What in the world is all the commotion going on outside?" exclaimed the butler. But the staff quickly gave him a bug-eyed stare and silently gestured over toward the war mage standing at the entry. The butler quickly straightened up, gave himself a quick pat-down, fixed his black cuffs and white gloves before hesitantly approaching their unexpected but clearly very important guest. "Oh my, forgive me, Magi. May I take your coat?" he asked timidly. "No, you can take me to Von Claris," she commanded. The butler swallowed hard as he quickly contemplated his options and offered a weak smile as he beckoned her to follow. Chapter 19, Governor Von Claris. The governor's personal library was his most treasured possession. While the rest of the mansion sparkled with polished marble and gilded trim, this room was full of warmth, and the dark mahogany wood was saturated with the sweet smell of beeswax candles, paper, and aged leather. The cozy, circular room was packed from floor to ceiling with books. At the center of the room was his large desk that was full of maps and a lot of other various oddities, a large hourglass and star charts. In the corner there was a large telescope. Tonight Clarence was not at his work desk. He was in his regal navy blue silk robe. He was sitting in his large cushioned green leather chair, and he had his sandaled feet propped up onto a matching stool, warming his toes by the fireplace. Just as he reached over to find his reading spectacles, the door flew open. I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, sir, but there is someone to see you, the butler announced. Clarence grimaced as he rubbed the deep, weathered lines in his forehead and reluctantly set his reading glasses back down on the little table beside him. He didn't bother to turn around or to get angry by the tone of his butler's voice. It was obviously someone he couldn't throw out. If that had been the case, he was quite certain James would have done so already, and filled him in all the lovely details at breakfast. "Who is it, James?" he asked tiredly. "Magi Frey, sir. She insists it's very important." Clarence perked up. Well, this was going to be interesting. "Ah, smashing! Please send her in." James let out an audible gulp, and he nervously cleared his throat. Sir, she is here already." "Pardon?" Clarence asked as he glanced up toward James. James gestured toward the tall mage standing in the middle of the room. Clarence strained his neck as he twisted around in his chair and let out a surprised guffaw. "Well, this is quite unusual and very exciting. You are very ambitious, I see," he chuckled. "Welcome. Come, have a seat by the fire," he beckoned. "Do you want any refreshments? I suppose you are here to talk about your estate and the dragon," he surmised, and pointed to the stone chessboard on the table between them. Do you play?" he ventured. Nora made her way over toward the second chair by the fireplace. She glanced disdainfully toward the chessboard. She hated chess. There were too many rules. Besides, she was not here to play games, at least not board games, and so she remained standing and fixed her best and meanest glare down onto the governor. "How long have you had this frost dragon?" she demanded. Clarence smiled a smug smile as he scooped up a cracker and slice of cheese from the silver snack tray beside him and took his time chewing before he answered. "Excellent. So you have met the dragon called Helvisti. I trust things are going well?" he remarked as he reached over to the snack tray. Nora's thin nostrils flared. "His name is Winter, and you didn't answer my question. How long have you had this frost dragon?" she demanded. Clarence turned his head to the side as he thoughtfully stroked his large, bristly, white mustache, causing little crumbs to fall down his robe. I would say well over 20 years. We brought her in as a little fledgling. She was becoming quite the nuisance, but the tribespeople revere her as a physical incarnation of Helvisti. So you can say we've sort of had her around for a while, but as you can imagine, as the dragon has grown, she has become very hard to manage." Nora was dumbfounded. "Let me get this straight. You've had a frost dragon for 20 years, and you haven't even bothered to tell anyone?" she demanded. Clarence smiled and put his hand up so he could finish chewing. "Oh, alas, I'm sorry to say that Helvesti is a perfectly normal, yet still very beautiful albino hendrake," he informed her, and then quickly brushed the crumbs from his hands before making another broad sweeping gesture. "I have a whole shelf of books devoted to dragons, and I at one time had hoped and thought the same as you. But alas, I fear frost dragons are somewhat of a myth, and if they did exist like the legends, well, they do not exist anymore." Nora pressed her fingertips together and took in a deep, serene, calming breath. "Oh, I see. Well, I am terribly sorry for bothering you. I had no idea. May I borrow a few of your books?" Clarice gave a sympathetic nod. "Perfectly all right. I am happy you stopped by, and don't feel bad. When I was a young whippersnapper, I climbed all those snowy mountains and searched the caves, hoping to find one. I even picked up a piece of obsidian from the foot of Helvesti's blessed mountain," he encouraged, and turned toward his butler. "James, please find the memoirs of a mender Farinke and the search for the mythical frost dragons of the north," he instructed. James bowed and quickly pulled out a large blue book with worn gold trim edges and presented it to Nora. Nora gratefully accepted the beautiful book with an appreciative smile. Clarice nodded in approval. "I think you will like it very much. Please come visit again. I will let you borrow another." But when he looked down at his plate of cheese and crackers, James let out a shrill, strangled wail of protest. "Ah, that book is priceless!" the butler shrieked. Clarence turned. His eyes went wide in horror as James had bodily placed himself in front of the hungry, crackling yellow flames of the fireplace, and the mage. The cheese and crackers went flying as he frantically shot to his feet. "Oh, what are you doing?" he gasped. Nora could have easily used magic to burn the book or push the butler out of the way, but after a brief struggle, she allowed the frantic butler to wrestle the book away. Inwardly, she was rather quite glad. She didn't really want to burn the book. She was just out to make a point and to get the governor's attention, and it had worked quite well. Clarice was beet red and quivering with rage. "How dare you?" he began. "How dare you?" Nora snapped back and poked him hard in the chest until he flopped back down into his chair. "How dare you?" he roared from his chair. Nora thundered back, her face going red and veins flaring from her neck as she raged. "How dare you keep my poor dragon in such wretched conditions? Do you have any idea how much that poor creature has suffered? You will never be elected again after the people of Helvesti have seen what you have done to my dragon." The blustering Von Clarice wilted in his chair. That can't be possible. I put General Gordon in charge of its care. He assured me that he had everything under control, and that he was going to bring in an expert," he countered. I am the expert, and I am appalled at the conditions General Gordon and his cronies have kept that poor creature in. Winter has been absolutely miserable and wretched, Nora shouted down at him. Governor Von Claris slammed his palms down onto the sides of his chair. Dear gods! You're absolutely right! Why, in sweet Helvisti's name, didn't you come to me sooner? He demanded. Nora nodded, but before she could respond, he thrust his thick, stubby finger into the air and shot to his feet. This is outrageous! James, bring me my winter coat and shoes, he commanded, and he turned to Nora. I am so glad you have come to me. General Gordon will be held fully responsible for this gross negligence, he vowed. I would be eternally grateful if you could spare some of your staff. The whole estate is in utter ruin and disrepair. I have been left without security. I don't want people snooping around or interfering with Winter's training, especially after the horrible abuse she has suffered. I'm afraid of what may happen if any children were to sneak in. Dear gods, of course, absolutely, Von Claris assured her. Nora blinked rapidly, forcing several tears out. May Helvisti bless you, she sniffled. The governor quickly rushed to her side and gently patted her hand in his. My dear, you must be so overwhelmed. He comforted her and quickly passed over a clean black silk handkerchief from his top pocket. I just hate to see such a poor, beautiful dragon suffer so, Nora gasped breathlessly. She was really working it up now. It's been living in its own filth for weeks, and I have no place to put her. The whole place is in ruin, and the barn is a horrid rat's nest and about to collapse. And General Gordon sent all my engineers to help at Glendon. I haven't anyone to help me. Oh, that's absolutely dreadful. There, my dear. I had no idea. Please don't cry, Claris gasped. Nora allowed herself to be guided over to the large, comfy chair. I'm so sorry I shouted at you. I was so upset. My hut burned down, and my poor dragon is in terrible condition, she sniffled. It burned down? How did that happen? He gasped. Nora hesitated. Cooking fire? I've been living on gruel since I've been here, and General Gordon said if I complained, he would have me flogged, and you are the only one left I have to turn to, she blubbered. So, you have been staying in a little hut all this time in the middle of winter? Claris gasped. Nora nodded. Not for long. You will stay in the guest house adjacent to mine until this injustice is made right, he vowed. As he slipped into his heavy bearskin fur coat, Rest, my dear. James will take care of you while I go pay General Samuel Gordon a visit, he declared. I'll go with you, Nora volunteered. Nonsense! Your job is to take care of the spirit of Helvisti. My job is to deal with everybody else. James glanced worriedly back over toward the beautiful books and turned toward Nora. Shall I show you to the guest house, Magi? He offered in a overly hopeful voice. You are so very sweet, James. Yes, thank you, she agreed. James smiled and quickly hurried over to her, making certain to place himself between the wall of books and the psychotic firebug to his right. I shall get some of the female staff to see that you are settled in and comfortable, he assured her. That is very chivalrous of you. If I didn't have Vila, you would make a wonderful sword companion, she praised him. James perked up and stood a little taller. Oh, no, Magi, I wouldn't know what to do with a sword, he laughed. You seem quite fit. Do you have any other skills? Can you draw maps? She asked. James shook his head. Well, I did a lot of swimming before this job. I used to go diving for oysters, he said proudly. You certainly seem to know your way around this library. I imagine you're quite educated, she remarked. I really wish they would change the name Sword Companion. It is so misleading, as they hardly ever need to use a sword unless their mage is trying to keep a low profile or injured, she sighed. James grimaced. Not really. I know how to read, write, and do maths, but I'm not formally educated. I just read a lot, that's all. That is one of the things I like about my job, he chuckled. Don't sell yourself short. Not everyone can do those things. Have you ever been to Glendon before, she asked. James smiled. I've seen pictures and read about it. It sounds wonderful. Nora smiled. You should see the size of the library at Founders. James bit his lower lip, and a hard line formed on his forehead. I heard that's only for mages. I wouldn't be allowed in, he lamented. The librarians have sword companions as well, Nora pointed out. James blinked. Well, I suppose they had to keep the books safe, he remarked. Nora felt a stab of guilt for the little stunt she had pulled, which involved threatening to burn the library book. Well, they do more than sort books. You see, librarians also organize search parties and look for things. Lost things, old things, relics, ancient cities, fossils, and different medicinal plants they find in old texts. And sometimes they journey thousands of miles and take their sword companions with them. It could be quite interesting. James was silent for several long moments. Their footsteps echoed loudly as they continued to walk through the marble halls. Do you think I could really be a sword companion? He asked. Nora laughed. That isn't up to me, but I think you would be pleasantly surprised and very happy with the generous salary you would receive from Founders if you completed your training and were selected, she assured him. Chapter 20 Daydreams and Nightmares. May didn't remember falling asleep, but when she awoke she was startled at how warm she was, and when her eyes fluttered open she found herself sandwiched between soft, black velvet and smooth scales. Raven, she squeaked in fright. The dragon pulled back his massive wings, and she winced as bright rays of light beamed down onto her from over the berm of the ash circle. Raven craned his long neck, tilted his head to the side, and glanced down at her with his big, shimmering, liquid silver eyes, as if she was some sort of hatchling fresh from the egg. Hey! May exclaimed. While she had been sleeping, Raven had plucked her up and placed her into his nest without her permission. The large bulldrake merely snorted at the noisy creature's ingratitude. With nimble dexterity, the dragon used his tail to pick her up and drop her on top of the outer rim of the ashen mound. You could have squished me, she exclaimed. Raven chortled at the thought as he slowly unraveled himself, rose to his feet, and lazily meandered toward the landing bridge. The dragon flexed his wings to their zenith, reared up onto his hind legs, and gauged the wind as he took in the morning smells. May chased after him. Raven, I'm sorry, you don't have to leave, she exclaimed. The lithy, armored, plated swan-like neck pivoted around, and the big, daunting black face with the bristly crown of black horns peeked under its wing. May suddenly got a vision of a large tree stump he found floating out in the ocean. This vision was placed next to the crude form of her brush. To him, it was just a little twig. Therefore, he would replace it with a bigger one, and then she would be happy. And if she wasn't happy, she would be more than compensated. "But I don't want a big log. What am I going to do with it?" she demanded. Raven tilted his head. May frowned. She got the vision of herself gnawing on it. "No, I don't like sticks." Raven blinked. He was clearly puzzled as to why she had even made such a big fuss over him eating the stupid brush to begin with. This seemed to perk up the dragon's interest as he swiveled his head around and self-consciously glanced about his scaly chest and then back at her. A strange guttural, fluted whistle rumbled deep from within his chest, resonated through his long neck, and rolled off his blue tongue. "Nope, not until you take me flying," May insisted. Raven's demeanor soured, and his big eyes narrowed. He would not let this silly little creature ride on top of him. May stuck out her tongue, folded her arms, and with a very dissatisfied harumph, turned away. Raven snorted and stubbornly fixed his gaze onto the horizon. His front right paw rasped against the stones and stamped down hard. May mimicked him and stamped her foot down as well. The dragon blinked and crooked his head, trying to look at her. May stubbornly whipped her head around, refusing to look at him. Raven chortled in amusement. May let out a frustrated sigh, albeit when she was about to give up and go back inside and fix some breakfast, the same sneaky, powerful, dexterous tail that had pulled her into the nest while she was asleep coiled around her ankles. May screamed as she desperately grasped at the smooth stone tiles, and she screamed until Founder's Keep turned into a tiny speck below, and she screamed until there was no more air to scream. After the initial shock wore off, she helplessly glanced about as she bounced along the big, fluffy white clouds. They flew higher and higher until they sailed past the sun and the moon. May gasped in wonder as the bright stars began to dance and to sing all around her in a beautiful chorus, which didn't make any sense at all, but it didn't have to because it was all a dream. Irene gently shook her awake. When May's eyes fluttered open, she glanced about, disappointed to find that she was still curled up right where she had been, and Raven was still dozing inside his nest. Irene smiled. "How are you?" she whispered. May squinted her eyes and let out a long, heavy sigh. "I was dreaming," she mumbled. Irene smiled again. "Come. There is a lot to be done," she encouraged in a low whisper. "What are we doing?" May yawned. "You are going to bond with him," Irene declared. "Sort of like a magi would with her sword companion," she explained. May's eyes widened. "I didn't know you were a mage," she marveled. Irene smiled and lightly touched May's little nose. "Do you think everyone goes to Founder's Keep to learn magic?" she asked. May might have nodded, but the amused tone in Irene's voice indicated that was clearly the wrong answer. "You are—" She was about to say something rude, but Irene's sharp green eyes narrowed, and she quickly bridled her tongue before she said something foolish and hated herself forever. "Do you have a sword companion?" May asked in a low voice. "I have my dragon," she replied, as she pulled out 8 small clay bowls from her satchel. May suddenly felt giddy and excited. "But will you ever pick one?" she ventured. To her surprise, Irene's jade-green eyes wandered, and a soft smile formed on her lips. Perhaps, Irene replied dismissively, and then directed May to set the clay bowls around the raven's nest, and to alter each with a bit of sage in one and incense in the other. Once she was finished, May came scurrying back. "Who is it?" she cried. Irene quirked a dark, stern brow. May gulped. It was then a very tired and cranky Cora hissed impatiently at them through the hole in the wall. "I need you two ninnies to focus! Can you do that?" she scolded them. May gasped. She was stunned that Cora had stayed awake all night to watch over them, and she eagerly bobbed her head up and down. "What is the sage and incense for? I have never heard about this in the Founder's Keep," she asked in a low whisper. Irene struck a match and lit a candle. "The smoke from the burning sage and incense keeps dragons docile, sort of like smoke for bees," she explained, and motioned May to quietly light the incense and the sage. "After this, you'll be entirely on your own," Irene warned. May accepted the candle and bit her lower lip. She looked toward Irene weirdly. Irene nodded toward Raven, giving her an impatient jade-green glower that sent her on her way. Her heart pounded inside her as she painstakingly moved from sage to incense, guarding the little flame until all 8 bowls were lit and the rich, sweet gray tendrils of smoke wafted into the air, filling the lobby. Once she was finished, May glanced back over toward Irene, but Irene didn't so much as blink. She just stared back with her usual disturbingly observant, calm green eyes and waited. Taking a deep, calming breath, May turned and knelt down on the ashen mound and fixed her attention on Raven's big, thorny head. One wrong move, and the dragon could quite easily fit her in his mouth and chomp her in half. Despite the danger, she couldn't help but admire the thorny black barbs growing under his chin. They weren't very big, but none of the other dragons that she had seen up close had them, not even Rex. May closed her eyes. She needed her full concentration. The only time she had ever soul-bonded any other living creature was at Founder's Keep. It had been the final assignment. It wasn't exactly as exciting or scary as it sounded, and she really couldn't compare the two at all. A poor little fruit fly in a jar was nothing compared to a dragon like Raven. As would be expected, the fruit fly didn't live long, and some of the girls even cried. One mender managed to resurrect the poor bug for 2 weeks, until finally she gave it a proper burial in the garden. Tesley was her name. She was a talented mender, but not exactly right in the head. She had nearly caught the whole girls' dormitory on fire for a silly spider. After that, Tesley had been moved to the specially gifted dormitory, which was made out of brick and a long way from everyone else. May had been sad when her pet fly had died. She hadn't been distraught. She understood that it was just a fly whose entire life lasted only a day. But it wasn't a pleasant feeling. She could feel it age, wither away within the hours, until finally she couldn't take it anymore, and she finally put the little bug out of its misery. She knew the whole exercise was to teach them that bonding with another creature was a very serious ordeal, and the little fruit fly in the jar would be nothing at all like a human, or a dragon for that matter. Mages often went raving mad when their sword companion died, and their guardians didn't fare much better. May remembered Toma, the old white-haired woman who haunted the library. She had lost her guardian ages ago, and she still talked to him, even though he wasn't there. nobody bothered poor old Magi Toma. She had a whole stack of books and charts from her library in her room, but not even the head librarian ever bothered to ask for them back. Once again, May cleared her thoughts and opened her mind and searched for Raven. She sensed him, and she smiled. In her mind's eye, in her head, she saw 2 surprised, big silver eyes flutter open. May felt her heart skip a beat as the dragon didn't seem at all a bit scared or angry at her. Raven was more curious. What was this silly creature doing inside his head, inside his dreams? "Hello, I'm May," she whispered as she reached out and gently stroked his snout. Raven's eyelids drooped as he yielded to her caress. "I like you. Do you like me?" May asked. Raven let out a soft, fluted, thrumming sound. "I wish you could stay forever," she whispered to him. She sent him images of endless heaps of ash for him to bathe and roll around in, of his scales being polished every day until they glowed like gems, and all the wild adventures they would have soaring through the air together. She sensed Raven yearning. She saw the eagerness in his silver eyes. But there was an awful, deep ache and a sadness in them. And then something strange happened that she hadn't ever experienced or heard of before. A slimy, dark, leech-like creature wriggled from Raven's nostrils. Irene grabbed May by the shoulder. In an instant, May was jolted back into the real world. Her eyes fluttered open. Cora called out to them. "Both of you get out now," she commanded. "No, wait, I can save him," May shrieked. But when she turned back, Raven's eyes had turned into deep, inky, black obsidian pools. May tried to reach out to him, to speak to him, but her Raven was gone. Cruel laughter and black smoke billowed out of the dragon's jaws. "Run!" Irene screamed. Cora watched helplessly as May turned and fled, but before she could get to the door, both young women were engulfed in flames. Tears ran down her face, and her voice grew hoarse as she shouted, "Loose! Bring it down! Bring it down!" At once, a storm of crossbow bolts and javelins rained down from the ceiling. The dragon answered back with fire. The upper rooms were flooded with flames and horrible screams. The recruits fled away, burning as they ran. Cora cursed bitterly as she took up a spear. But just as she was about to go out, a fuzzy-headed recruit barreled past her. It was Brumir. She recognized him, being carried on the stretcher from last night. "Idiot!" she cursed as she followed after him. But there was no calling him back. Brumir stood upright, out in the open, and he took aim. The entire room shook as the great bulldrake roared and reeled back as the crossbow bolt buried itself into its eye socket. "Irene! Irene!" May sobbed. Cora turned somehow, some way. May had not been harmed, but Irene, poor Irene, whom had dove on top of her to shield May with her magic, lay limp and unconscious. Perhaps even dead. The gods only knew what it had cost her to shield May. "Son of Maltine!" Cora shrieked as she ran over toward the stone-faced Brumir, who was now winding up his crossbow. Cora grabbed him by his dirty gray tunic. "Help me get them out of here," she commanded. Brumir turned, and the moment he saw Irene, he scooped her up into his arms and followed Cora out of the kill zone and set her down by the steps. Once back inside, Cora gave May a quick look over. "Irene! Irene! I can't hear her thoughts!" May shrieked. She's fine. She's just sleeping, Cora lied. How are you? Are you hurt? She asked. May shook her head. It wasn't him. It wasn't Raven. Please don't kill him. It's not him, she pleaded. Nora leaned forward, giving the hysterical young girl a kiss on the forehead. Sleep, she whispered, and May's eyes rolled to the back of her head. With great care, Cora eased her gently to the floor, and then turned her attentions back over toward Irene, and then Brumir. Brumir stared up at her. Cora felt a lump in her throat. She's fine. She's going to be fine, she assured him. Do you know the way to Mender's Hall? Of course he did, but she needed him to focus. Brumir nodded, and was about to kneel down to pick up Irene, but Cora stopped him. No, she's fine, understand? Cora insisted firmly. Tears ran down Brumir's ashen face. Take this. Run to Mender's Hall. Show him this. Bring them here. Tell him Cora sent you. And if they won't come, I need you to take charge and bring the wounded to them. Can you do that? Brumir nodded. Cora smiled and squeezed his hand. You have done well. Now go. I will finish this, she assured him. While upstairs was an absolute hellscape of charred bodies and horrible screams, Torn and his recruits down below had just managed to clear out the holes that had been clogged full of ash that prevented them from attacking the dragon's soft underbelly with their spears and heavy-powered crossbows. But the moment they had an opening, they unleashed hell until the dragon's blood and gore came pouring through the murder holes. Is it dead yet? Torn called. Cora grimly strode forward with her spear in hand. The dragon lay on the ground, twisting and churning. She thrust her weapon into its remaining eye socket until the tip of the spear exited out the back of the dragon's skull. It's dead, she called back. But we have a lot of casualties up top, she added. Did you see what went wrong? Torn called up. Cora leaned against her staff and glanced down at Torn through the hole in the floor as she shook her head. It was then she heard the haunted sound of alarm bells tolling off in the distance. At that moment, she knew that what Torn had been warning everyone about had come true, and while they had been hunkered down, the Druun had found their opening, and Glendon, Marne's capital city and trade hub, was under attack. Just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, several dark silhouettes of armed soldiers crested the landing bridge. It was a band of elite Druun raiders, and judging by what had happened with the dragon, there was most likely one or several other mages amongst them. Torn, Cora called. Fire blossomed from the palms of her hand. What? You were right. Elemental flames lapped at her fingertips as Cora grimly strode out to meet the enemy. What do we do? Milo exclaimed in panic. Torn cursed. You two chatterheads come with me. The rest of you ugly sons of Maltine go up top and clean any of the scraps of Druun Cora leaves behind. Stay together. Don't die or I'll kill you again, he barked. Where are we going? Ben exclaimed. We're going to war, Torn growled, and he pointed his gnarled fingers toward the bundle of heavy ballista bolts. Grab as many as you can carry, and follow me, he commanded, as he swung a heavy ballista bolt over one shoulder and the platform under his other arm. Meanwhile, up top, 6 other masked figures in all black crested the ledge, but the moment they became aware of Cora, they froze in their tracks. As they were still in the process of pulling their weapons from the longboats below, Do you want to jump before you're on fire? Or after? Cora inquired. One man drew his dagger, but with a wave of her hand she set him ablaze. The Droon soldier wailed and shrieked wretchedly as he ran about, and his flesh sizzled and his eyes melted into his skull, until he blindly ran for the ledge, but only prolonged his suffering as he only succeeded in running in tight little circles. Altogether, the rest threw themselves off the stone bridge, and those that weren't crushed on the rocks below swam to their boats. Cora took grim satisfaction as she watched them shriek and writhe as one by one she set their boats and supplies ablaze, forcing whatever survivors that remained to swim, or at least try to swim. The current was strong, and their warships were too far away. Cora grimly used the butt end of her spear to shove the dead, blackened, crispy Droon off the bridge, and she strode over to the ledge, her eyes scanning for the mages responsible for killing so many of the young recruits. And Irene. Poor Irene. But as hard as she looked, she didn't see them. They had to be extremely powerful necromancers to control the bulldrake from that far away. It had been a trap all along. The Droon necromancers had let the dreadful creature loose to hunt them down, like a falconer loosing its falcons to hunt them like quail. Cora suspected they had controlled the bulldrake for months, perhaps even years prior to the attack. That was why May could not bond with it. The poor creature had been bonded already. These same necromancers had killed it too, hollowed it out like parasites killing their host before May could save him. There was nothing else Cora could do. She turned. She watched helplessly as smoke rose from the city. The Droon had brought more dragons, and they were wreaking havoc. She wanted to go fly out and assist Torn, but she knew better. If she did that, the back door to Founder's Keep would be open and exposed. Even if 20 Droon managed to take Dragonhall alone, it would take hundreds of lives, perhaps even years, to push them back out again. That wasn't counting the dragons that would either be killed, stolen, or both. That was why the Droon had only sent a handful of elite soldiers to climb the cliffs. If they had succeeded in their plan, it would have been nearly impossible to take back the stronghold. If they failed, the casualties were relatively low. Yes, the Droon might have lost their bulldrake, but it still opened a vital gap, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. And Dragonhall had lost 3 of their invaluable members to their team: Don Rascal, Nora Frey, Irene Rivers. Cora winced as she mentally counted the casualties that she knew about. She dreaded what she would find up top. Adar Solston had been upstairs, and he had not called back down yet. Adar was a fellow mage, and he was always full of random quotes, and his room was full of books. Everyone teased him that they were purely for decoration. He had specialized in weather magic. Naturally, he and Torn did not get along. Cora had to insist that they be on separate levels. Torn, initially, thought Adar had gotten the best view because he had been a fellow mage, but Cora managed to convince him that if things did go horribly wrong, he would get a better target at the dragon's soft underparts, and if things went well, he would be closer to the wine cellar. Cora smiled. She was quite certain Adar was all right. He was probably busy tending to the wounded. He probably needed help. The moment Cora turned and went back inside, her nostrils were seared with the acrid smell of burnt flesh. The stone corridors echoed with shrill screams and whimpers as, one by one, the horribly maimed and wounded were taken out on stretchers. So many burns, so many awful burns. Finally, once the wounded were cleared out, Dragon Hall became eerily quiet. The only noises were the muffled sobs of the living bringing out the charred remains of the dead. Cora watched helplessly. She turned to Irene. Her face was pale, like her life had completely drained from her. Determined to set an example to the rest of the recruits, Cora could not let herself weep. With as much serenity as she could muster, she knelt down and gently closed Irene's eyelids. "Sleep well," she whispered. Irene's long black eyelashes fluttered back open, and green eyes stared up at her. Cora gasped and recoiled her hand. This was not Cora's first dead body. Dead bodies did strange things. They twitched and made strange noises as they decomposed, and they stared up at you. To be absolutely certain, Cora's trembling fingers gently stroked Irene's ice-cold cheek, and then she felt the faintest cool trickle of air coming from her nostrils. She wasn't dead. Irene wasn't dead. Not yet, anyway. "Oh, gods!" Cora gasped as she stroked her cold, clammy forehead. With a glimmer of hope, she rose to her feet. "Hadar! Hadar, I need your help! Where is Magi Solston?" she exclaimed. Cora knew he was obviously busy. He was naturally dealing with heavy losses, but the dead could wait. Irene was alive. She had to get Irene to Mender's Hall immediately. She spotted Brumir. She could always spot Brumir from the crowd of his fuzzy heads. He was quite large compared to everyone else. Brumir's face was red and sweaty from helping carry the dozens of stretchers down the stone stairway. Judging by what little of the shriveled blackened remains she could see beneath the blanket, they clearly were not in a hurry to get to Mender's Hall. She ran to him. "Where is Magi Hadar Solston? Have you seen him?" she demanded. Brumir and the other bald-headed recruits stared at her with blank faces and haunted eyes. Cora's heart dropped like a rock as they lowered the stretcher. Gone was the distinguished, peppered gray beard. Gone were the hazel eyes. And the quiet smile. All gone. Just the blackened meat and shriveled sinew clinging to charred bone remained. The young, fuzzy-headed recruit stared up at her. Cora swallowed hard. She forced herself to think. This could have been anyone. And then she glanced down at the charred soles of the leather riding boots, and she turned toward Brumir and numbly accepted her ring back. "I'm so sorry, Magi. They wouldn't come. I showed them your ring, and I begged them, but they wouldn't come," Brumir apologized. "I need you to bring another stretcher," Cora insisted. "But Magi, there isn't any," the other recruits responded. Cora shuddered. She knew what needed to be done. She knelt. Her hands trembled as she grasped the sheet and pulled it over Adar's head. "Rest in peace, dear friend," she whispered as she gently rolled the disturbingly light, charred remains of him onto his side and pulled the stretcher out from beneath him. Brumir, you've done so much. I only ask this one thing of you. Get Irene to Mender's Hall, she instructed. But what about May? Brumir asked. She is resting, Cora assured him. But you, he began. Irene is dying. Move, quickly, she snapped at him. As commanded, they hustled away, leaving Cora kneeling by Adar. She wanted to go out and fight, but who else was left? Cora had to stay. She was the only one whom the dragons knew and would follow if Glendon fell. The rest was all out of her hands. It was all up to what was left of Glendon's decimated fleet and their regular army. Of course, the field mages of Founders and Torin. Torin would be out there flying into hell alone. Pride, selfish pride, told him she should be out there with him to fight and die with him. But if they could not stop them, nothing would, and the only right and most useful thing she could do was instruct the recruits to hold out as long as possible so she could get their dragons to safety. She would tell the young recruits she would bring back help. This would be a lie, but the Droon would not take the dragons. Without the dragons, all of Marn would fall. But if she could save them, perhaps one day, perhaps even in a few years, she would see Glendon liberated again. Cora closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. Sprigga, grant us mercy. Varus, God of war, give us the strength to prevail.